We can put it on this side. This whole thing is put on this side.
So you move this one up.
Yeah, it's kind of, and it's easy with it. Yeah, it's easy with this one. Thank you so much. But you can leave it here. When people change, they can use it. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta, Volume 1, Chapter 20. Stay high. But while this was going on, an old man, 1 year past his allotted 70 wandered into New York's East Village and set about to prove to the world that he knew where God could be found. In only 3 months, the man, Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta, succeeded in convincing the world's toughest audience, bohemians, acid heads, potheads, and hippies, that he knew the way to God. Turn off, sing out, and fall in. That he knew the way to God, turn off, sing out, and fall in. This new brand of holy man, with all due deference to Dr. Leary, has come forth with a brand of consciousness expansion that's sweeter than acid, cheaper than pot, and non-bustable by fuzz. How is it all possible? Through Krishna, the Swami says from the East Village, October 1966. Prabhupada's health was good that summer and fall, so it seemed. He worked long and hard, and except for 4 hours of rest at night, he was always active. He would speak intensively, on and on, never tiring, and his voice was strong. His smiles were strong and charming, his singing voice loud and melodious. During kirtana, he would sound Bengali mridanga rhythms on his bongo drum, sometimes for an hour. He ate heartily of rice, dal, chapatis, and vegetables with a G. His face was full and his belly protuberant. Sometimes, in a light mood, he would drum with 2 fingers on his belly and say that the resonance affirmed his good health. His golden color had the radiance of youth and well-being preserved by 70 years of healthy, non-destructive habits. When he smiled, virility and vitality came on so strong as to embarrass a faded, dissolute New Yorker. In many ways, he was not at all like an old man, and his new followers completely accepted his active youthfulness as a part of the wonder of Swamiji, just as they had come to accept the wonder of the chanting and the wonder of Krishna. Swamiji was not an ordinary man. He was spiritual. He could do anything. None of his followers dared advise him to slow down, nor did it ever really occur to them that he needed such protection. They were busy just trying to keep up with him. During the 2 months at 26th Second Avenue, he had achieved what had formerly been only a dream. He now had a temple, a duly registered society, full freedom to preach, and a band of initiated disciples. When a god brother had written asking him how he would manage a temple in New York, Prabhupada had said he would need men from India, but that he might find an American or two who could help. That had been last winter. Now Krishna had put him in a different situation. He had received no help from his godbrothers, no big donations from Indian business magnates, and no assistance from the Indian government. But he was finding success in a different way. These were happy days, he said. He had struggled alone for a year, but then Krishna sent me men and money. Yes, these were happy days for Prabhupada, but his happiness was not like the happiness of an old man's sunset years, as he fades into the dim comforts of retirement. His was the happiness of youth, a time of blossoming, of new powers, a time when future hopes expand without limit. He was 71 years old, but in ambition, he was a courageous youth. He was like a young giant just beginning to grow. He was happy because his preaching was taking a hold, just as Lord Chaitanya had been happy when he had traveled alone to South India, spreading the chanting of Hare Krishna. Prabhupada's happiness was that of a selfless servant of Krishna to whom Krishna was sending candidates for devotional life. He was happy to place the seed of devotion within the hearts and to train them in chanting Hare Krishna, hearing about Krishna, and working to spread Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada continued to accelerate. After the first initiations and the first marriage, he was eager for the next step. He was pleased by what he had, but he wanted to do more. It was the greed of the Vaishnava, not a greed to have the sense gratification, but to take more and more for Krishna. He would go in like a needle and come out like a plow. That is to say, from a small, seemingly insignificant beginning, he would expand his movement to tremendous proportions. At least that was his desire. He was not content with his newfound success and security at 26 Second Avenue, but was yearning to increase ISKCON as far as possible. This had always been his vision, and he had written it into the ISKCON charter to achieve real unity and peace in the world with the members and humanity at large. Swamiji gathered his group together. He knew that once they tried it, they would love it. But it would only happen if he personally went with them. Washington Square Park was only half a mile away, maybe a little more. Ramindra Swarupa. He never made a secret of what he was doing. He used to say, I want everybody to know what we are doing. Then one day, the day came. He said, we are going to chant at Washington Square Park. Everybody was scared. You just don't go into a park and chant. It seemed like a weird thing to do. But he assured us, saying, you don't be afraid when you start chanting. Krishna will help you. And so we trudged down to Washington Square Park, but we were very upset about it. Up until that time, we were not exposing ourselves. I was upset about it, and I know that several other people were, to be making a public figure of yourself. With Prabhupada leading, they set out on that fierce Sunday morning, walking the city blocks from Second Avenue to Washington Square in the heart of Greenwich Village. And the way he looked, just by walking, he created a sensation. None of the boys had shaped heads or robes, but because of Swamiji, with his saffron robes, his wide pointy shoes, and his shaved head held high, people were astonished. It wasn't like when he would go out alone. That brought nothing more than occasional second glance. But today, with a group of young men hurrying to keep up with him as he headed through the city streets, obviously about to do something, he caused a stir. Through guys and kids called out names, though guys and kids called out names, and others laughed and made sounds. A year ago in Butler, the Agrawals had been sure that Prabhupada had not come to America for followers. He didn't want to make any waves, Sally had thought, but now he was making waves, walking through the New York City streets, headed for the first public chanting in America, followed by his first disciples. In the park, there were hundreds of people milling about, stylish, decadent Greenwich villagers, visitors from other boroughs, tourists from other states and other lands, an amalgam of faces, nationalities, ages, and interests. As usual, someone was playing his guitar by the fountain. Boys and girls were sitting together and kissing. Some were throwing frisbees, some were playing drums or flutes or other instruments, and some were walking at their dogs, talking, watching everything, wandering around. It was a typical day in the village. Prabhupada went to patch of lawn mare. Despite a small sign that read keep off the grass, many people were lounging. He sat down and one by one his followers sat beside him. He took out his brass hand cymbals and sang the Maha Mantra, and his disciples responded awkwardly at first, then stronger. It wasn't as bad as they had thought it would be. Jagannatha. It was a marvelous thing, a marvelous experience that Swamiji brought upon me because it opened me up a great deal and I overcome a certain shyness the first time to chant out in the middle of everything. A curious crowd gathered to watch, though no one joined in. Within a few minutes, two policemen moved in through the crowd. Who's in charge here? An officer asked roughly. The boys looked toward Prabhupada. Didn't you see the sign? An officer asked. Swamiji furrowed his brow and turned his eyes toward the sign. He got up and walked to the uncomfortably warm pavement and sat down again. His followers straggled after to sit around him. Prabhupada continued the chanting for half an hour, and the crowd stood listening. A guru in America had never gone onto the streets before and sung the names of God. After Kirtana, he asked for a copy of Srimad Bhagavatam and had Hayagriva read aloud from the preface. With clear articulation, Hayagriva read, disparity in the human society is due to the basic principle of a godless civilization. There is God, the Almighty God, One, from whom everything emanates, by whom everything is maintained, and in whom everything is merged to rest. The crowd was still. Afterwards, the Swami and his followers walked back to the storefront, feeling elated and victorious. They had broken the American silence. Alan Ginsberg lived nearby on Eastern Street. One day, he received a peculiar invitation in the mail. Practice a transcendental sound vibration. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This chanting will cleanse the dust from the mirror of the mind. International Society for Krishna Consciousness meeting at 7 a.m. daily, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 7 p.m. You are cordially invited to come and bring your friends. Swamiji had asked the boys to distribute it around the neighborhood. One evening, soon after he received the invitation, Allen Ginsberg and his roommate, Peter Orlovsky, arrived at the storefront in a Volkswagen minibus. Allen had been captivated by the Hare Krishna mantra several years before. He had first encountered it at the Kumbh Mela festival in Allahabad, India, and he had been chanting it often ever since. The devotees were impressed to see the world-famous author of Howl and leading figure of the Beat generation enter their humble storefront. His advocation of free sex, marijuana, and LSD, his claims of drug-induced visions of spirituality in everyday sights, his political ideas, his explorations of the sanity, revolt, and nakedness, and his attempts to create a harmony of like-minded souls, all were influential on the minds of American young people, especially those living on the Lower East Side. Although by middle-class standards he was scandalous and disheveled, he was in his own right a figure of worldly repute, more than anyone who had ever come to the storefront before. Allen Ginsberg. Bhaktivedanta seemed to have no friends in America, but was alone, usually alone, and gone somewhat like a lone hippie to the nearest refuge, the place where it was cheap enough to rent. There were a few people sitting cross-legged on the floor. I think most of them were Lower East Side hippies who had just wandered in off the street, with beards and the curiosity and inquisitiveness and the respect for spiritual presentation of some kind. Some of them were sitting there with glazed eyes, but most of them were just like gentle folk, bearded, hip, and curious. They were refugees from the middle class in the Lower East Side, looking exactly like the street sadhus in India. It was very similar, that phase in American underground history. And I liked immediately the idea that Swami Bhaktivedanta had chosen the Lower East Side of New York for his practice. He'd gone to the lower depths. He'd gone to a spot where, like the side streets of Calcutta, than any other place. Alan and Peter had come for the kirtana, but it wasn't quite time. Prabhupada had not come down. They presented a new harmonium to the devotees. It's for the kirtanas, said Alan, a little donation. Alan stood at the entrance of the storefront talking with Hayagriva, telling him how he had been chanting Hare Krishna around the world at peace marches, poetry readings, a procession in Prague, in a writers' union in Moscow, secular kirtana, said Alan, but Hare Krishna nonetheless. Then Prabhupada entered. Alan and Peter sat with the congregation and joined in the kirtana. Alan played harmonium. Alan, I was astounded that it came with a chanting because it seemed like a reinforcements from India. I had been running around singing Hare Krishna, but had never understood exactly why or what it meant. But I was surprised to see that he had a different melody because I thought the melody I knew was the melody, the universal melody. I had gotten used to my melody that actually the bigger difference I had with him was over the tune. Because I'd solidified it in my mind for years, I had to hear another tone actually, and had to hear another tone actually blew my mind. After the lecture, Alan came forward to meet Prabhupada, who was still sitting on his dais. Alan offered his respects with folded palms and touched Prabhupada's feet, and Prabhupada reciprocated by nodding his head and folding his palms. They talked together briefly, and then Prabhupada returned to his apartment. Alan mentioned to Hagagriva that he would like to come by again and talk more with Prabhupada. So Hagagriva invited him to come the next day and stay for lunch prasadam. Don't you think Swamiji is a little too esoteric for New York? Alan asked. Haigriva thought, maybe, he replied. Haigriva then asked Alan to help the Swamiji since his visa would soon expire. He had entered the country with a visa for 2 months stay, and he had been extending his visa for 2 more months again and again. This has gone for 1 year. But the last time he had applied for an extension, he had been refused. We need an immigration lawyer, said Hayagriva. I'll donate to that, Alan assured him. The next morning, Allen Ginsberg came by with a check and another harmonium. Up in Prabhupada's apartment, he demonstrated his melody of chanting Hare Krishna, and then he and Prabhupada talked. Alan, I was a little shy with him because I did not know where he was coming from. I had that harmonium I wanted to donate, and I had a little money. I thought it was great now that he was here to expound on the Hare Krishna mantra that would sort of justify my singing. I knew that what I was doing, but I didn't have any theological background to satisfy further inquiries. And there was someone who did. So I thought that was absolutely great. Now I could go around singing Hare Krishna, and if anybody wanted to know what it was, I could just send them to Swami Bhaktivedanta to find out. If anyone wanted to know the technical intricacies of the ultimate history, I could send them to him. He explained to me about his own teacher and about Chaitanya and the lineage going back. His head was filled with so many things, and what he was doing. He was already working on his translations. He always seemed to be sitting there just day after day and night after night, and I think he had one or two people helping him. Prabhupada was very cordial with Alan, quoting a passage from Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says that whatever a great man does, others will follow. He requested Alan to continue chanting Hare Krishna at every opportunity so that others would follow his example. He told about Lord Chaitanya's organizing the first civil disobedience movement in India, leading to Sankirtana protest march against the Muslim ruler. Alan was fascinated. He enjoyed talking with the Swami. But they had their differences. When Alan expressed his admiration for a well-known Bengali holy man, Prabhupada said that the only holy man was bogus. Prabhupada said the holy man was bogus. Alan was shocked. He never before heard a Swami severely criticize another's practice. Prabhupada explained on the basis of Vedic evidence the reasoning behind his criticism, and Alan admitted that he had naively thought that all holy men were 100% holy. But now he decided that he should not simply accept a sadhu, including Prabhupada, on blind faith. He decided to see Prabhupada in a more severe critical light. Alan, I had a very superstitious attitude of respect, which probably was an idiot sense of mentality. And so Swami Bhaktivedanta's teaching was very good to make me question that. It also made me question him and not take him for granted. Alan described a divine vision he had in which William Blake had appeared to him in sound and in which he had understood the oneness of all things. A sadhu in Vrindavana had told Alan that this meant that William Blake was his guru. But to Prabhupada, this made no sense. Alan, this main thing, above and beyond all our differences, was an aroma of sweetness that he had, a personal selfless sweetness like total devotion. And that was what always conquered me. Whatever intellectual questions or doubts I had, or even cynical views of ego, in his presence there was a kind of personal charm coming from dedication that conquered all our conflicts. Even though I did not agree with him, I always liked to be with him. Alan agreed at Prabhupada's request to chant more and try to give up smoking. Do you really intend to make these American boys into Vaishnavas? Alan asked. Yes, Prabhupada replied happily, and I will make them all Brahmanas. Alan left a $200 check to help cover the legal expenses for extending the Swami's visa and wished him good luck. Brahmanas, Alan did not see how such a transformation could be possible. September 23. It was Radhashtami, the appearance day of Srimati Radharani, Lord Krishna's eternal consort. Prabhupada held his second initiation. Case began Kirtananda, Steve became Satsvarupa, Bruce became Brahmananda, and Chuck became Achyutananda. It was another festive day with a fire sacrifice in Prabhupada's front room and a big feast. Prabhupada lived amid the drug culture in a neighborhood where the young people were almost desperately attempting to alter their consciousness, whether by drugs or by some other means, whatever was available. Prabhupada assured them that they could easily achieve the higher consciousness they desired by chanting Hare Krishna. It was inevitable that in explaining Krishna consciousness, he would make allusions to the drug experience, even if only to show that the two were contrary paths. He was familiar already with Indian sadhus who took ganja and hashish on the plea of aiding their meditations. And even before he had left India, hippie tourists had become a familiar sight on the streets of Delhi. The hippies liked India because of the cultural mystique and easy access to drugs. They would meet their Indian counterparts who assured them that taking hashish was spiritual, and then they would return to America and perpetrate their misconceptions of Indian spiritual culture. It was the way of life. The local head shops carried a full line of paraphernalia, marijuana, LSD, peyote, cocaine, and hard drugs like heroin and barbiturates were easily purchased on the streets and in the parks. Underground newspapers reported important news on the drug scene, featured a cartoon character named Captain High, and ran crossword puzzles that only a seasoned head could answer. Prabhupada had to teach that Krishna consciousness was beyond the revered LSD trip. Do you think taking LSD can produce ecstasy and higher consciousness? He once asked his storefront audience. Then just imagine a room full of LSD. Krishna consciousness is like that. People would regularly come in and ask Swamiji's disciples, "Do you get high from this?" And devotees would answer, "Oh, yes, you can get high just by chanting. Why don't you try it?" Greg Sharf, Brahmananda's brother, hadn't tried LSD, but he wanted higher consciousness, so he decided to try the chanting. Greg, I was 18. Everyone at the storefront had taken LSD, and I thought maybe I should too because I wanted to feel like part of the crowd. So I asked Umapati, "Hey, Umapati, do you think I should try LSD because I don't know what you guys are talking about?" He said, "No, the Swamiji said you didn't need LSD. I never did take it, so I guess it was okay." Hi, Griva. Have you ever heard of LSD? It's a psychedelic drug that comes like a pill, and if you take it, you can get religious ecstasies. Do you think this can help my spiritual life? Prabhupada, you don't need to take anything for your spiritual life. Your spiritual life is already here. Had anyone else said such a thing, Hayagriva would never have agreed with him. But because Swamiji seemed to so absolutely positive, therefore there was no question of not agreeing. Satsvarupa. I knew Swamiji was in a state of exalted consciousness, and I was hoping that somehow he could teach the process to me. In the privacy of his room, I asked him, "Is the spiritual advancement that you can make from which you can't fall back? Is there a spiritual advancement that you can make from which you won't fall back?" By his answer, yes, I was convinced that my own attempts to be spiritual on LSD only to fall down later could be replaced by a total spiritual life such as Swamiji had. I could see he was convinced, and then I was convinced. Greg, LSD was the spiritual drug of the times, and the Swamiji was the only one who dared to speak out against it, saying it was nonsense. I think that was the first battle he had to conquer in trying to promote his movement on the Lower East Side. Even those who came regularly to the storefront thought that LSD was good. Probably the most famous experiments with LSD in those days were by Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, Harvard psychology instructors who studied the effects of the drug, published their findings in professional journals, and advocated the use of LSD for self-realization and fulfillment. After being fired from Harvard, Timothy Leary went up on to become a national priest of LSD, and for some time ran an LSD commune in Millbrook, New York. When the members of Millbrook commune heard about the Swami on the Lower East Side who let his followers in a chant that got you high, they began visiting the storefront. One night, a group of about 10 hippies from Millbrook came to Swamiji's kirtana. They all chanted not so much in worship of Krishna as to see what kind of high the chanting could produce, and after the lecture, a Millbrook leader asked about drugs. Prabhupada replied that drugs were not necessary for spiritual life, that they could not produce spiritual consciousness, and that all drug-induced religious visions were simply hallucinations. To realize God was not so easy or cheap that one could do it just by taking a pill or smoking. Chanting Hare Krishna, he explained, was a purifying process to uncover one's pure consciousness. Taking drugs would increase the covering and bar one from self-realization and bar one from self-realization. But have you ever taken LSD? The question now became a challenge. No, Prabhupada replied. I have never taken any of these things, not even cigarettes or tea. You have not taken it. Then how can you say what it is? The Millbrookers looked around, smiling. Two or three even burst out with laughter, and they had snapped their fingers, thinking the Swami had been checkmated. I have not taken, Prabhupada replied regally from his dais, but my disciples have taken all these things, marijuana, LSD, many times, and they have given them all up. You can hear from them. Hayagriva, you can speak. And Hayagriva sat up a little and spoke out in his stentorian best. Well, no matter how high you can go on LSD, you eventually reach a peak and then you have to come back down, just like traveling to outer space on a rocket ship. He gave one of Swamiji's familiar examples. Your spacecraft can travel very far away from the Earth for thousands of miles, day after day, but it cannot simply go on traveling and traveling. Eventually, it must land. On LSD, we experience going up, but we always have to come down again. That's not spiritual consciousness. When you actually attain spiritual or Krishna consciousness, you stay high. Because you go to Krishna, you don't have to come down. You can all stay there high forever. You can stay high forever. Prabhupada was sitting in his back room with Hayagriva and Umapadi and other disciples. The evening meeting had just ended, and the visitors from Millbrook had gone. Krishna consciousness is so nice, Swamiji, and Umapati spoke up. You just get higher and higher, and you don't come down. Prabhupada smiled. Yes, that's right. No more coming down, Umapati said, laughing, and the others also began to laugh. Some clapped their hands, repeating, no more coming down. The conversation inspired Hayagriva and Umapati to produce a new handbill. Stay high forever, no more coming down. Practice Krishna consciousness, expand your consciousness by practicing the transcendental sound vibration. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The leaflet went on to extol Krishna consciousness over any other high. It included phrases like end all bring downs and turn on, and it spoke against employing artificially induced methods of self-realization and expanded consciousness. Someone objected to flyers playing too much of a hippie mentality, but Prabhupada said it was all right. When these drug people in the Lower East Side came and talked to Swamiji, he was so patient with them. He was speaking on a philosophy which they had never heard before. When someone takes LSD, they really into themselves and they don't hear properly when someone talks to them. So Swamiji would make particular points and they would not understand him. So he would have to make the some point again. He was very patient with these people, but he would not give in their own claim that LSD was a bona fide spiritual aid to self-realization. October 1966. Tompkins Square Park was the park on the Lower East Side. On the south, it was bordered by 7th Street with its 4 and 5-storied brownstone tenements. On the north side was 10th with more brownstones, but in better condition, and a very old small building that housed the Tompkins Square branch of the New York Public Library. On Avenue B, the park's east border, stood St. Bridget Church, built in 1948, when the neighborhood had been entirely Irish. The church, school, and rectory still occupied much of the block and the west border to the park. Avenue A was lined with tiny old candy stores selling newspapers, magazines, cigarettes, and egg cream sodas at the counter. There were also a few bars, several grocery stores, and a couple of Slavic restaurants specializing in inexpensive vegetable broth, which brought Ukrainians and hippies side by side for their bodily nourishment. The park's 10 acres held many tall trees, but at least half the park was paved. A network of 5-foot high, heavy wrought iron fences weaved through the park, lining the walkways and protecting the grass. The fences and the many walkways and entrances to the park gave it the effect of a maze. Since the weather was still warm and it was Sunday, the park was crowded with people. Almost all the space on the benches that lined the walkways was occupied. They were all people, mostly Ukrainians, dressed in outdated suits and sweaters. Even in the warm weather, sitting together in in clan stalking. There were many children in the park also, mostly Puerto Ricans and blacks who also, but also fair-haired, hard-faced slum kids racing around on bikes and playing with balls and frisbees. The basketball and handball courts were mostly taken by the teenagers, and as always, there were plenty of loose running dogs. A marble miniature gazebo, 4 pillars and a roof with a drinking fountain inside, was a remnant from the old days, 1891, according to the inscription. On its 4 sides were the words hope, faith, charity, and temperance. But someone had sprayed the whole structure with black paint, making crude designs and illegible names and initials. Today, a bench had been taken over by several conga and bongo drummers, and the whole park pulsed with their demanding rhythms. And the hippies were there, different from the others. The bearded bohemian men and their long-haired young girlfriends, dressed in old blue jeans, were still an unusual sight. Even in the Lower East Side melting pot, their presence created tension. They were from middle-class families, so they had not been driven to the slums by dire economic necessity. This created a conflict in their dealings with the underprivileged immigrants. And the hippies' well-known proclivity for psychedelic drugs, their revolt against their families and affluence, and their absorption in the avant-garde sometimes made them the jeered minority among their neighbors. But the hippies just wanted to do their own thing and create their own revolution for love and peace. So usually they were tolerated, although not appreciated. There were various groups among the young and hip at Tompkins Square Park. They were friends who had gone to the same school together, who took the same drug together, also, or who agreed on a particular philosophy of art, literature, politics, or metaphysics. They were lovers, they were groups hanging out together for reasons undecipherable except for the common purpose of doing their own thing. And there were others who lived like hermits. A loner would sit on a park bench analyzing the effects of cocaine, looking up at the strange rustling green leaves in the trees and the blue sky above the tenements, and then down to the garbage at the street as he helplessly followed his mind from fear to illumination, to disgust to hallucination, and on until after a few hours the drug began to wear off and he was again a common stranger. Sometimes they would sit up and all night, spaced out in the park until at last, in the light of morning, they could stretch on benches to sleep. Hippies especially took to the park on Sundays. They at least passed through the park on their way to St. Mark's Place, Greenwich Village, and or the Lexington Avenue subway at the Astor Place, or the I&D subway at Houston and Second, or to catch an uptown bus on First Avenue, a downtown bus on Second, or across town on North. Or they went to the park just to get out of their apartments and sit together in the open air, to get high again, to talk, or to walk through the park's maze of pathways. But whatever the hippies' diverse interests and drives, the Lower East Side was an essential part of the mystique. It was not just a dirty slum, it was the best place in the world to conduct the experiment in consciousness. For all its filth and threat of violence and the confined life of its brownstone tenements, the Lower East Side was still the forefront of the revolution in mind expansion. Unless you were living there and taking psychedelics or marijuana, or at least intellectually pursuing the quest for free personal religion, you were not enlightened and you were not taking part in the most progressive evolution of human consciousness. And it was this searching, I guess, a quest beyond the humdrum existence of the ordinary materialistic straight American that brought utility to the otherwise eclectic gathering of hippies on the Lower East Side. Into this chaotic pageant, Swamiji entered with his followers and sat down to hold the kirtana. 3 or 4 devotees who arrived ahead of him selected an open area of the park, put out the oriental carpet Robert Nelson had donated, sat down on it, and began playing karatalas and chanting Hare Krishna. Immediately, some boys rode up on their bicycles, braked just short of the carpet, and stood astride the bikes, curiously and irreverently staring. Other passersby had gathered to listen. Meanwhile, Swamiji, accompanied by half a dozen disciples, was walking the 8 blocks from the storefront. Brahmananda carried the harmonium and the Swamiji's drum. Kirtananda, who was now shaven-headed at Swamiji's request and dressed in loose flowing canary yellow robes, created an extra sensation. Drivers pulled their cars over to have a look, the passengers leaning forward, agape at the outrageous dress and shaped head. As this group passed a store, people inside would poke each other and indicate the spectacle. People come to the window of their tenements, taking in the Swami and his group as if a parade were passing. The Puerto Rican tough guys especially couldn't restrain themselves from exaggerated reactions. Hey, Buddha, they taunted. Hey, you forgot to change your pajamas. They made shrill screams as if imitating Indian war whoops they had heard in Hollywood westerns. Hey, Arabs, exclaimed one heckler, who began imitating what he thought was an Eastern dance. No one on the street knew anything about Krishna consciousness, nor even of Hindu culture and customs. To them, the Swami's entourage was just a bunch of crazy hippies showing off. But they did not quite know what to make of the Swami. He was different. Nevertheless, they were suspicious. Some, however, like Irving Helpburn, a veteran Lower East Side resident, felt sympathetic toward the stranger who was apparently a very dignified person on a peaceful mission. Irving Halpern, a lot of people had spectacularized notions of what a Swami is, as though they were going to suddenly see people lying on little matters made out of nails and all kinds of other absurd notions. Yet here came just a very graceful, peaceful, gentle, obviously well-meaning being into a lot of hostility. Hippies, what are they? Communists? While the young taunted, the middle-aged and elderly shook their heads and stared, cold and uncomprehending. The way to the park was spotted with blasphemies, tribal jokes, and tension, but no violence. After the successful kirtana in Washington Square Park, Prabhupada had regularly been sending out parades of 3 or 4 devotees chanting and playing hand cymbals through the streets and sidewalks of the Lower East Side. On one occasion, they had been bombarded with water balloons and eggs, and they were sometimes faced with Buddhists looking for a fight. But they were never attacked, just stared at, laughed at, or shouted at. Today, the ethnic neighbors just assumed that Prabhupada and his followers had come onto the streets dressed in outlandish costume as a joke, just to turn everything topsy-turvy and cause tears and howls. They felt that their responses were only natural for any normal, respectable American slum dweller. So it was quite an adventure before the group even reached the park. Swamiji, however, remained unaffected. What are they saying? He asked once or twice. And Brahmananda explained. explained. Prabhupada had a way of holding his head high, his chin up, as he walked forward. It made him look aristocratic and determined. His vision was spiritual, and he saw everyone as a spiritual soul and Krishna as the controller of everything. Yet aside from that, even from a worldly point of view, he was unafraid of the city's pandemonium. After all, he was experienced Calcutta man. The kirtana had been going for about 10 minutes when Swamiji arrived, stepping out of of his white rubber slippers, just as if he were home in the temple. He sat down on the rug with his followers, who had now stopped their singing and were watching him. He wore a pink sweater and around his shoulders a khadi wrapper. He smiled. Looking at his group, he indicated the rhythm by counting 1, 2, 3. Then he began clapping his hands heavily as he considered counting 1, 2, 3. The Karat tellers followed, at first with wrong beats, but he kept the rhythm by clapping his hands, and then they got it, clapping hands, clashing cymbals artlessly to slow, steady beat. He began singing prayers that no one else knew. Bandaham Shiguroshi Tapada Kamalam Shiguram Vishnavim Sa. His voice was sweet like the harmonium, rich in the nuances of Bengali melody. Sitting on the rug under a large oak tree, he sang the mysterious Sanskrit prayers. None of his followers knew any mantra but Hare Krishna, but they knew Swamiji, and they kept the rhythm, listening closely to him while the trucks rumbled on the street and the conga drums pulled in the distance, pulsed in the distance. As he sang Shirupam Sagra Jayatam, the dogs came by, kids stared, a few mockers pointed fingers. Hey, who's that priest, man? But his voice was a shelter beyond the clashing dualities. His voice went on ringing cymbals while he sang alone. Shirada Krishna Padan. Prabhupada sang praise in praise of Srimati Radharani's pure conjugal love for Krishna, the beloved of the gopis. Each word passed down for hundreds of years by the miniature associates of Krishna was saturated with deep transcendental meaning that only he understood. Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamin Tams Sa. They waited for him to begin. Hare Krishna, although hearing him chant was exciting enough. More people came, which was what Prabhupada wanted. He wanted them chanting and dancing with him. And now his followers wanted that too. They wanted to be with him. They had tried together at the UN Anand Ashram, the Washington Square. It seemed that this would be the thing they would always do. Go with Swamiji, sit and chant. He would always be with them chanting. Then he began the mantra, the mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. They responded too low and muddled off first. But he returned to them again, singing it right and triumphant. Again they responded, gaining heart, ringing kartalas and clapping hands. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Again he sang it alone, and they stayed hanging closely on each word, clapping, beating cymbals, and watching him looking back at them from his inner concentration, his old age wisdom, his bhakti, and out of love for Swamiji, they broke loose from their surroundings and joined him as a chanting congregation. Swamiji played his small drum, holding his strap in his left hand, bracing the drum against his body, and with his right hand playing intricate mridanga rhythms. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. He was going stronger to half an hour, repeating the mantra, carrying them with them, carrying them with him as interested onlookers gathered in greater numbers. A few hippies sat down on the edge of the rug, copying the cross-legged sitting posture, listening, clapping, trying the chanting, and the small inner circle of Prabhupada and his followers grew as gradually more people joined. As always, his kirtana attracted musicians. Irving Halpern. I make flutes and I play musical instruments. There are all kinds of different instruments that I make. When the Swami came, I went up and started playing, and he welcomed me. Whenever a new musician would join and play their first note, he would extend his arm. It would be as though he had stepped up to the podium and was going to lead the New York Philharmonic. I mean, there was this gesture that every musician knows. You just know when someone else wants to play with them and feels good that you are playing with them. And this very basic kind of musician communication was there with him, and I related to it very quickly, and I was happy about it. Lone musicians were always loitering in different parts of the park, and when they heard they could play with Swamiji's chanting and that they were welcome, then they began to come by one. A saxophone player came just because there was such a strong rhythm section to play with. Others, like Irving Halpern, saw it as something spiritual with good vibration. As the musicians joined, more passerby were drawn into the kirtana. Prabhupada had been singing both lead and chorus. And we're down into the kirtana. Prabhupada had been singing both lead and chorus, and many who had joined now sang the lead part also, so that there was a constant chorus of chanting. During the afternoon, the crowd grew to more than 100, with a dozen musicians trying with their own conga and bongo drums, bombo flutes, metal flutes, mouse organs, wooden metal clackers, tambourines, and guitars to stay with the Swami.
Irving Harlan. The park resounded. The musicians were very careful in listening to the mantras. When the Swami sang Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, there was sometimes a Krishna, a tripling of what had been a double syllable. It would be usually on the first stanza, and the musicians really picked up on it. The Swami would pronounce it in a particular way, and the musicians were really meticulous and listened very carefully to the way the Swami would sing. And we began to notice that there were different melodies for the same brief sentence. And we got to count on that one regularity, like one would count on the conductor of an orchestra or the lead singer of a madrigal. It was very pleasant, and people would dig one another in their ribs. They would say, "Hey, see!" We would catch and repeat a particular subtle pronunciation of a Sanskrit phrase that the audience, in their enthusiasm, while they would be dancing or playing, had perhaps missed. Or the Swami would add an extra beat, but it meant something in the way in which the drummer, who at that time was the Swami, the main drummer, would hit the drums. I have talked to a couple of musicians about it, and we agreed that in his head, this Swami must have had hundreds and hundreds of melodies that had been brought back from the real learning from the old other side of the world. So many people came there just to tune in to the musical gift, the transmission of the Dharma. Hey, they would say, listen to this song, listen to this holy monk. People were really sure there were going to be unusual feats, grand standing, flashy levitation, or whatever people expected was going to happen. But when the simplicity of what the Swami was really saying, when you began to sense it, whether you are motivated to actually make a lifetime commitment and go this way of life, or whether you merely wanted to appreciate it and place it in a place and give certain due respect to it, it turned you around. And that was interesting too, the different ways in which people regarded the Kirtan. Some people thought it was a prelude, some people thought it was a main event, some people liked the music, some people liked the poetic sound of it. Then Allen Ginsberg, and Peter Orlovsky arrived, along with some of their friends. Allen surveyed the scene and found a seat among the chanters. With his black beard, his eyeglasses, his bald spot surrounded by long black ringlets of hair, Allen Ginsberg, the poet patriarch, come to join the chanting, greatly enhanced the local prestige of the Kirtan. Prabhupada, while continuing his ecstatic chanting and drum playing, acknowledged Allen and smiled. A reporter from the New York Times dropped by and asked Allen for an interview, but he refused. A man should not be disturbed while worshipping. The Times would have to wait. Allen, Tompkins Square Park was a hotbed of spiritual conflict in those days, so it was absolutely great. All of a sudden, in midst of all the talk and drugs and theory, for some people to put their bodies there singing, to break through the intellectual ice and come out with total bhakti, that was really amazing. The blacks and the Puerto Ricans were out there with drums too, doing conga. But here was a totally different kind of group, some of them with shaven heads, and it was interesting. It was a repetitious chant, but that was also great. It was an easy chant to get into. It was an open scene. There was no boxer corner there in the actual practice. So, general smiles and approval and encouragement as a beginning of some kind of real communal get together in the park with a kind of serious underbase for exchange instead of just hog dog on the drums. Prabhupada was striking to see. His brow was furrowed in the effort of singing loud, and his visage was strong. The veins in his temples stood out visibly, and his jaw jutted forward as he sang his Hare Krishna, for all to hear. Although his demeanor was pleasant, his chanting was intensive, sometimes straining, and everything about him was concentration. It wasn't someone else's yoga retreat or silent peace vigil, but a pure chanting bee in of Prabhupada's own doing. It was a new wave, something everyone could take part in. The community seemed to be accepting it. It became so popular that the ice cream vendor came over to make sales. Beside Prabhupada, a group of young blonde-haired boys, 5 or 6 years old, were just sitting around. A young Polish boy stood staring. Someone began burning frankincense on a glowing coal in a metal strainer. and the sweet fumes billowed among the flutists, drummers, and chanters. Swamiji mentioned to his disciples, and they got up and began dancing. Tall, thin Strayadisha, his black pockets stuffed with stay high forever flyers, raised his hands and began to dance. Beside him, in a black turtleneck, big chanting beads around his neck, danced Achyutananda, his curly, almost frizzy hair long and disarrayed. Then Brahmananda got up. He and Achyutananda stood facing each other, arms outstretched as in the picture of Lord Chaitanya's Kirtan. Photographers in the crowd moved forward. The boys danced, shifting their weight from left foot to right foot, striking a series of angelic poses, their large red chanting beads around their necks. They were doing the Swami step. Brahmananda. Once I got up, I thought I would have to remain standing for as long as Swamiji played the drum. It will be an offense, I thought, if I sit down while he is still playing. So I danced for an hour. Prabhupada gave a lecture of acceptance by a typically Indian movement of his head, and then he raised his arms, inviting more dancers. More of his disciples began dancing, and even a few hippies got up and tried it. Prabhupada wanted everyone to sing and dance in Sankirtan. The dance was a sedate swaying and a stepping of bare feet on the rug, and the dancers' arms were raised high. Their fingers extended toward the sky above the branches of the autumn trees. Here and there throughout the crowd, chanters were enjoying private ecstasies. A girl with her eyes closed played finger cymbals and shook her head dreamily as she chanted. A Polish lady with a very old, worn face and a babushka around her head stared incredulously at the girl. Little groups of old men in kerchiefs, some of them wearing sunglasses, stood here and there among the crowd, talking animatedly and pointing out the interesting sights in the kirtan. Kirtanananda was the only one in a dhoti, looking like a young version of Prabhupada. The autumn afternoon sunlight fell softly on the group, spotlighting them in a golden glow with long, cool shadows. The harmonium played a constant drone, and a boy wearing a military fatigue jacket improvised atonal creations on a wooden recorder. Yet the total sound of the instruments blended, and Swamiji's voice emerged above the mulling tones of each chord. And so it went for hours. Prabhupada held his hand and shoulders erect, although at the end of each line of the mantra, he would sometimes shrug his shoulders before he started the next line. His disciples stayed close by him, sitting on the same rug, religious ecstasy visible in their eyes. Finally, he stopped. Immediately, he stood up and then knew he was going to speak. It was 4 o'clock, and the warm autumn sun was still shining on the park. The atmosphere was peaceful, and the audience attentive and mellow from the concentration on the mantra. He began to speak to them, thanking everyone for joining in the kirtan. The chanting of Hare Krishna, he said, had been introduced 500 years ago in West Bengal by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Hare means, O energy of the Lord. Krishna is the Lord, and Rama is also a name of the Supreme Lord, meaning the highest pleasure. His disciples sat at his feet listening. Raya Rama squinted through his shielding hand into the sun to see Swamiji, and Kirtanananda's head was cocked to one side, like a bird's who is listening to the ground. He stood erect by the stout oak, his hands folded loosely before him in a proper speaker's posture, his light saffron robes covering him gracefully. The tree behind him seemed perfectly placed, and the sunshine dappled leafy shadows against the thick trunk. Behind him, through the grove of trees, was the steeple of St. Bridget's. On his right was a dumpy, middle-aged woman wearing a dress and hairdo that had been out of style in the United States for 25 years. On his left was a bold-looking hippie girl in tight denims, and beside her a young black man in a black sweater, his arms crossed across his chest. Next was a young father holding an infant, then a bearded young street sadhu, his long hair parted in the middle, and two ordinary short-haired middle-class men and their young female companions. Many in the crowd, although standing close by, became distracted, looking off here and there. Prabhupada explained that there are three platforms: sensual, mental, and intellectual, and above them is the spiritual platform. The chanting of Hare Krishna is on the spiritual platform, and it is the best process for reviving our eternal blissful consciousness. He invited everyone to attend the meetings and 22nd Avenue and concluded his brief speech by saying, "Thank you very much. Please chant with us." Then he sat down, took the drum, and began the kirtan again. If it were risky for a 71-year-old man to thump a drum and shout so loud, then he would take that risk for Krishna. It was too good to stop. He had come far from Vrindavan, survived the non-Krishna Yoga society, waited all winter in obscurity. America had waited hundreds of years with no Krishna chanting. No Hare Krishna had come from Thodi's or Emerson's appreciation, though they had pored over English translations of the Gita and Puranas. And no Kirtana had come from Vivekananda's famous speech on behalf of Hinduism at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. So now that he finally had Krishna Bhakti going, flowing like the Ganges to the sea, it could not stop. In his heart, he felt the infinite will of Lord Chaitanya to deliver the fallen souls. He knew this was the desire of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his own spiritual master, even though caste conscious Brahmanas in India would disapprove of his associating with such untouchables as these drug mad American meat eaters and their girlfriends. But Swamiji explained that he was in full accord with the scriptures. The Bhagavatam had clearly stated that Krishna consciousness should be delivered to all races. Everyone was a spiritual soul, and regardless of birth, they could be brought to the highest spiritual platform by chanting the holy name. Never mind whatever sinful things they were doing, these people were perfect candidates for Krishna consciousness. Tompkins Square Park was Krishna's plan. It was also part of the earth, and these people were members of the human race. And the chanting of Hare Krishna was the dharma of the age. Walking back home in the early evening, past the shops and crowded tenements, followed by more than a dozen interested new people from the park, the Swami again sustained occasional shouts and taunts. But those who followed him from the park were still fleeing the aura of an ecstasy that easily tolerated a few taunts from the street. Prabhupada especially was undisturbed. As he walked with his head high, not speaking, he was gravely absorbed in his thoughts, and yet his eyes actively noticed people and places and exchanged glances with those whom he passed on his way along 7th Street, past the churches and funeral homes, across First Avenue to the noisy, heavily trafficked Second Avenue, then down Second past liquor stores, coin laundries, delicate scents, past the Iglesia Alianza Cristina Missionera, the Kohinoor Intercontinental Restaurant Palace, then past the Church of the Nativity, and finally back home to number 26. There was a crowd of people from the park standing on the sidewalk outside the storefront. Young people waiting for him to arrive and unlock the door to matchless gifts. They wanted to know more about the dance and the chant and the elderly Swami and his disciples who had created such a beautiful scene in the park. They filled the storefront. Outside on the sidewalk, the timid or uncommitted loitered near the door or window, smoking and waiting or peering in and trying to see the paintings on the wall. Swamiji entered and walked directly to his dais and sat down before the largest gathering that had ever graced his temple. He spoke further on Krishna consciousness, the words coming as naturally as breathing as he quoted the Sanskrit authority behind what they had all been experiencing in the park. Just as they had all chanted today, he said, "So everyone should chant always." A long-haired girl sitting close to Swamiji's dais raised her hand and asked, seemingly in trance, When I am chanting, I feel a great concentration of energy on my forehead, and then a buzzing comes and a reddish light. Just keep on chanting, Swamiji replied. It will clear up. Well, what does the chanting produce? She seemed to be coming out of a trance now. Chanting produces chanting, he replied. Just as when you are calling the name of your beloved, if there is someone you love very much, then you have to repeat his name again and again. It is out of love. A man spoke up without raising his hand. But isn't it just a kind of hypnotism on song? Like if I chanted Kola Kola over and over, wouldn't it be the same? No, Prabhupada replied. You take any word, repeat it for 10 times, and you will feel disgusted. But we chant 24 hours and we don't feel tired. Oh, we feel new energy. The question seemed more relevant today. The guests had all been chanting in the park and now they were probing philosophically into what they had experienced. The Swami's followers marked this as a victory, and they felt some responsibility as hosts and guides for the others. Swamiji had asked Kirtanananda to prepare some prasadam for the guests, and soon Kirtanananda appeared with small paper cups of sweet rice for everyone. The chanting process is just to cleanse the mind, said Prabhupada. We have so many misunderstandings about ourselves, about this world, about God, and about the relationships between these things. We have so many misgivings. This chanting will help to cleanse the mind. Then you'll understand that this chanting is not different from Krishna. A boy who was accompanying the long haired girl spoke out incoherently. Yes, no, Prabhupada. Yes, yes, yes. In the beginning, we have to chant. We may be in whatever position we are, it doesn't matter. If you begin chanting, the first benefit will be Cheto Darpana Marjanam. The mind will be clear of all dirty things. And the next stage will be that the sufferings, the miseries of this material world will subside. Boy, well, I don't quite understand what the material world is because, Prabhupada, the material world is full of sufferings and miseries. Don't you understand that? Are you happy? Boy, sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm not. Prabhupada, no, you are not happy. That sometimes is your imagination. Just like a diseased man says, oh, yes, I am well. What is that well? He is going to die, and he is well. Boy, I don't claim any ultimate happiness. Prabhupada, no, you do not know what happiness is. Boy, but it's greater or lesser. Prabhupada, yes, you do not know what is happiness. An older man standing with his arms folded near the rear of the temple. Well, of course, that sorrow or that suffering might add the spice to what make that suffering that goes in between seem happiness. Prabhupada, no, the thing is that there are different kinds of miseries that we all understand. It is only due to our ignorance that we don't care for it. Just like a man who is suffering for a long time, he has forgotten what is real happiness. Similarly, the sufferings are there already. For example, and he directed himself to the young man with his girlfriend. Take, for example, that you are a young man. Now, would you like to become an old man? Boy, I will become the old man in the process of Prabhupada. You will become means you will be forced to become an old man, but you don't like to become an old man. Boy, I'm not going to be forced to become an old man. Prabhupada, yes, yes, force. You will be forced. Boy, but I don't see why. Prabhupada, if you don't want to become an old man, you will be forced to become an old man. Boy, it's one of the conditions of Prabhupada. Yes, that condition is miserable. Boy, I find it not miserable. Prabhupada, because you are a young man. But ask any old man how he is suffering. You see, a deceased man, do you want to be deceased? Boy, I wouldn't search it out. Prabhupada, Boy, I wouldn't search it out. Prabhupada, no, no, just answer me. Do you like to be deceased? Boy, what is a disease? Prabhupada, just answer. Boy, what is disease? Prabhupada, oh, you have never suffered from disease? You have never suffered from disease? Prabhupada looked dramatically incredulous. Boy, I have had the mumps and the measles and whooping cough, which is what everyone has. And you get over it. Some people in the audience laugh. Prabhupada, everyone may be suffering, but that does not mean that it is not suffering. We have to admit that we are always in suffering. Boy, if we have never known happiness, I feel sure I have never known suffering either. Prabhupada, that is due to your ignorance. We are in suffering. We don't want to die, but death is there. We don't want to be diseased, but disease is there. We don't want to become old. Old age is there. We don't want so many things, but they are forced upon us, and any sane man will admit that these are sufferings. But if you are accustomed to take these sufferings, then you say it is all right. But any sane man won't like to be diseased. He won't like to be old and he won't like to die. Why do you have this peace movement? Because if there is war, there will be death. So people are afraid. They are making agitation. There should be no war. Do you think that death is a very pleasurable thing? Boy, I have never experienced Prabhupada. You have experienced and forgotten. Many times you have died. You have experienced, but you have forgotten. Forgetfulness is no excuse. Suppose a child forgot some suffering, that does not mean he did not suffer. Boy, no, I agree. Prabhupada, yes. So suffering is there. You have to take direction from realized souls, from authorities. Just like in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam. This world is full of miseries. So one has to realize it. Unless we understand that this place is miserable, there is no question of how to get out of it. A person who doesn't develop this understanding is not fully developed. Just like the animals, they do not understand what misery is. They are satisfied. It was late when he finally returned to his apartment. One of the boys brought him a cup of hot milk, and someone remarked they should do the chanting in the park every week. Every day, he replied. Even while half a dozen people were present, he lay down on his thin mat. He continued to speak for some minutes, and then his voice trailed off, preaching in fragmented words. He appeared to doze. It was 10 o'clock, then tiptoed out, softly shutting the door. October 10th. It was early. Swamiji had not yet come down for class, and the sun had not yet risen. Satswarupa and Kirtanananda sat on the floor of the storefront, reading a clipping from the Morning Times. Satswarupa, has the Swami seen it? Kirtanananda, yes, just a few minutes ago. He said it's very important. It's historic. He especially liked that it was a New York Times. Satswarupa, reading aloud. Swami's flock chants in park to find ecstasy. 50 followers clap and sway to hypnotic music at East Side ceremony, sitting under a tree in a Lower East Side park and occasionally dancing. 50 followers of the Hindu Swami repeated a 16-word chant for 2 hours yesterday. It was more than 2 hours. For 2 hours yesterday afternoon, to the accompaniment of cymbals, tambourines, sticks, drums, bells, and a small reed organ. Repetition of the chant, Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta says, is the best way to achieve self-realization in this age of destruction. While children played on Hovings Hill, a pile of dirt in the middle of Tompkins Square Park. Hovings Hill? Kirtanananda, I think it's a joke named after the park's commissioner. Satswarupa, oh, Hovings Hill, a pile of dirt in the middle of Tompkins Square, or bicycled along the sunny walks. Many in the crowd of about 100 persons standing around the chanters found themselves swaying to or clapping hands in time to the hypnotic rhythmic music. It brings a state of ecstasy, said Allen Ginsberg, the poet, who was one of the celebrants. For one thing, Allen Ginsberg said, The syllables force yoga breath control. That's one psychological explanation. Satswarupa and Kirtanananda laughing. That's nonsense. The ecstasy of the chant or mantra Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kirtanananda. The Swami said that's the best part because they have printed the mantra. It's all perfect. Whoever reads this can be purified just the same as if they had chanted. Satswarupa continuing has replaced LSD and other drugs for many of the Swami's followers. Mr. Ginsburg said, he explained that Hare Krishna, pronounced Hare, is the name of Vishnu, a Hindu god, as the bringer of light. Rama, pronounced Rama, is the incarnation of Vishnu as the prince of responsibility. What? Where did he get that? It sounds like something out of an encyclopedia. The chant, therefore, names different aspects of God, Mr. Ginsburg said. Why so much from Mr. Ginsburg? Why not Swamiji? Another celebrant, 26-year-old Howard M. Wheeler, who described himself as a former English instructor at Ohio State University, now devoting his full time to the Swami, said, I myself took 50 doses of LSD and a dozen of peyote in 2 years, and now nothing. Later, the Swami orders his followers to give up all intoxicants, including coffee, tea, and cigarettes, he said in an interview after the ceremony. In this sense, we are helping your government, he added. However, he indicated the government apparently has not appreciated this help sufficiently. For the Department of Immigration recently told Swami Bhaktivedanta that his 1 year visitor's visa had expired and that he must leave, he said. The case is being appealed. The Swami, a swarthy man with short cropped greyish hair and clad in a salmon colored robe over a pink sweater, said that when he first met his own teacher or guru in 1922, he was told to spread the cult of Krishna to the Western countries through the English language. Therefore, in his old age, 71, I have taken so much risk. It says that we are going to come there and chant every Sunday. His followers include some social workers. I guess that's me. Kirtanananda. I think this article will bring a lot of new people. The Swami came down for class. The morning was chilly and he wore a peach colored turtleneck jersey his disciples had brought for him at a shop on Orchard Street. They had also started wearing such jerseys, a kind of unofficial uniform. Swamiji didn't mention the Times article. He began singing the Sanskrit prayers. Vandeham Shri Guru. I offer my obeisances to my spiritual master. Then he began singing Hare Krishna, and the boys joined in. Sing softly, Prabhupada cautioned them. But no sooner had he spoken than water began pouring down through the cracks in the ceiling. The man upstairs didn't like early morning kirtans, and he began stomping his feet to show that this flood was no accident. What is this? Prabhupada looked up, disturbed, but with a touch of amusement. The boys looked around. Water was pouring down in several places. Get some pots, he said. A boy ran upstairs to Swamiji's apartment to get pots from the kitchen. Soon, 3 pots were catching the water as it dripped in 3 separate places. How does he do it? Asked Umapati. Is he pouring water on the floor? Prabhupada asked Brahmananda to go up and speak to the man, to tell him that the kirtana would be a quiet one. Then he asked everyone to sit back down amid the dripping and the pots and continued chanting. Softly, he said, softly. That evening, the temple was filled with guests. It is so much kindness of the Supreme Lord, Prabhupada said, that he wants to associate with you. So you should receive him. Always chant Hare Krishna. Now, this language is Sanskrit, and some of you do not know the meaning. Still, it is so attractive that when we chanted Hare Krishna in the park, oh, old ladies, gentlemen, boys, and girls all took part. But there are also complaints, just like we are receiving daily reports that our Sankirtana movement is disturbing some tenants here. Ravindra Swarupa was walking down 2nd Avenue on his way to the Swamiji's morning class when an acquaintance came out of the Jumps Spa Candy and news store and said, "Hey, your Swami is in the newspaper. Did you see?" "Yeah," Ravindra Swarupa replied. "The New York Times." "No," his friend said, "today." And he held up a copy of the latest edition of the East Village Other. The front page was filled with a two-color photo of the Swami, his hands folded decorously at his waist, standing in yellow robes in front of the big tree in Tompkins Square Park. He was speaking to a small crowd that had gathered around, and his disciples were at his feet. The big steeple of St. Bridget's formed a silhouette behind him. Above the photo was a single headline, "Save Earth Now," and beneath was the mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Below the mantra were the words, "See centerfold." That was the whole page, whole front page. Ravindra Swarupa took the newspaper and opened it to the center, where he found a long article and a large photo of Swamiji with his left hand on his head, grinning blissfully in an unusual casual moment. His friend gave him the paper, and Ravindra Swarupa hurried to Swamiji. When he reached the storefront, several boys went along with him to show Swamiji the paper. "Look," Ravindra Swarupa handed it over. "This is the biggest local newspaper. Everybody reads it." Prabhupada opened his eyes wide. He read aloud, "Save Earth Now," and he looked up at the faces of the boys. Umapati and Hayagriva wondered aloud what it meant. Save Earth Now. Was it an ecological pun? Was it a reference to no. Was it a reference to staving off nuclear disaster? Was it poking fun at Swamiji's evangelism? "Well," said Umapati, "after all, it is the East Village Other. It could mean anything." "Swamiji is saving the earth," Kirtanananda said. "We are trying to," Prabhupada replied, "by Krishna's grace." Methodically, he put on the eyeglasses he usually reserved for reading the Bhagavatam and carefully appraised the page from front to bottom, from top to bottom. The newspaper looked incongruous in his hands. Then he began turning the pages. He stopped at the centerfold and looked at the picture of himself and laughed, then paused, studying the article. "So," he said, "read it." He handed the paper to Hayagriva. "Once upon a time," Hayagriva began loudly. It was a fanciful story of a group of theologians who had killed an old man in a church, and the subsequent press report that God was now dead. But the story went on. Some people didn't believe it. They had dug up the body and found it to be not the bod of Gaudi, but that was his PR man, organized religion. At once, the good tidings swept across the wide world. God lives. But where was God? Hayagriva read dramatically to an enthralled group. A full page ad in the New York Times offering a reward for information leading to the discovery of the whereabouts of God and signed by Martin Luther King and Ronald Reagan brought no response. People began to worry and wonder again. God, said some people, lives in a sugar cube. Others whispered that the sacred secret was in a cigarette. But while all this was going on, an old man, 1 year past his allotted 70, wandered into New York East Village and set about to prove to the world that he knew where God could be found. In only 3 months, the man, Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta, succeeded in convincing the world's toughest audience, Bohemians, acid heads, potheads, and hippies, that he knew the way of God. He knew the way to God. turn off, sign out, and fall in. This brand of holy name, with all due deference to Dr. Leary, has come forth with a brand of consciousness expansion that's sweeter than acid, cheaper than pot, and non-bustable by fuss. How is all this possible? Through Krishna, the Swami says. The boys broke into cheers and applause. Achyutananda apologized to Swamiji for the language of the article. It's a hippie newspaper. That's all right, said Prabhupada. He has written in his own way, but he has said that we are giving God. They are saying that God is dead, but it is false. We are directly presenting, here is God. Who can deny it? So many theologians and people may say there is no God, but the Vaishnava hands God over to you freely as a commodity. Here is God. So he has marked this. It is very good. Save this paper. It is very important. The article was long. For the cynical New Yorker, it said, living, visible, tangible proof can be found at 26th 2nd Avenue, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 7 and 9. The article described the evening kirtans quoted from Prabhupada's lecture and mentioned a rhythmic, hypnotic 16-word chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, sung for hours on end to the accompaniment of hand clapping, cymbals, and bells. Swamiji said that simply because the mantra was there, the article was perfect. The article also included testimony from the Swami's disciples. I started chanting to myself, like the Swami said, when I was walking down the street, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, over and over, and suddenly everything started looking so beautiful. The kids, the old men and women, even the creeps looked beautiful, to say nothing of the trees and flowers. It was like I had taken a dozen doses of LSD, but I knew there was a difference. There is no coming down from this. I can always do this anytime, anywhere. It is always with you. Without sarcasm, the article referred to the Swamiji's discipline forbidding coffee, tea, meat, eggs, and cigarettes. To say nothing to marijuana, LSD, alcohol, and illicit sex. Obviously, the author admired Swamiji, the energetic old man, a leading exponent of the philosophy of personalism, which holds that the one God is a person, but that his form is spiritual. The article ended with a hint that Tompkins Square Park would see similar spiritual happenings each weekend. There, in the shadow of Howings Hill, God lives in a trance like dance and chant. October 12th. It was to be a love pageant rally, marking California's new law prohibiting the possession of LSD. The rally's promoters urged everyone to come to Tompkins Square Park in elaborate dress. Although the devotees had nothing to do with LSD laws, they took the rally as another opportunity to popularize the chanting of Hare Krishna. So they went, with the Swami's blessings, carrying finger cymbals and a homemade tambourine. The devotees looked plain in their dark jeans and lightweight zippered jackets. All around them, the dress was extravagant. Tie-dyed shirts, tight-bleached jeans, period costumes, painted faces. There was even a circus clown. Tully Cooperberg of the Fox Rock Band carried an American flag with the stars rearranged to spell LOVE. But so far, the rally had been a dud. Just a strange set of drugged young people milling near the large tree where Swamiji had chanted and spoken just a few days before. Swamiji's boys made their way through the crowd to a central spot and started chanting Hare Krishna. A crowd pressed in close around them. Everyone seemed to be friendly spirits, just unorganized, without any purpose. The idea behind the rally had been to show love and the pageant of LSD vision. But not much had been happening. Someone was walking around with a bucket of burning incense. Some hippies sat back on the park benches, watching everything through colored glasses. But the kirtan was attractive, and soon a crowd gathered around the boys as they chanted. Kirtanananda, his shaved head covered with a knit skull cap, stood beside tall Jagannath, who, with his dark framed glasses and wavy hair, looked like a great horned owl playing hand cymbals. Umapati, also playing hand cymbals, looked thoughtful. Brahmananda sat on the ground in front of them, his eyes closed and his mouth widely open, chanting Hare Krishna. Beside him and looking moody sat Raphael, and next to him, ascetically thin faced Ravindra Swarupa. Close by, a policeman stood watching. The hippies began to pick up the chanting. They had come together, but there had been no center, no lecture, no amplified music. But now they began clapping and swaying, getting into the chanting as if it was a single purpose. The chanting grew stronger, and after an hour, the group broke into a spontaneous dance, joining hands and singing out Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. They skipped and danced together, circling the tree and Swamiji's disciples. To the hippies, it was in fact a love pigeon rally, and they had found the love and peace they were searching for. It was in this mantra Hare Krishna had become their anthem, their reason for coming together, the life of the love beach and rally. They didn't know exactly what the mantra was, but they accepted it as something deep within the soul, a metaphysical vibration. They tuned into it. Even the clown began chanting and dancing. Only the policeman remained aloof and sober, though he also could see that new demonstration would be a peaceful one. The dance continued, and only the impending dusk brought the love pageant rally to a close. The devotees hurried back to Swamiji to tell him all that had happened. He had been sitting at his desk, translating the Srimad Bhagavatam. Although he had not been physically present at the kirtan, his disciples had acted on his instruction. So, even without leaving his room, he was spreading the chanting of Hare Krishna. Now he sat, waiting for the report. They burst into his room with shining eyes, flushed faces, and hoarse voices relating the good news. Not only had they dutifully chanted, but hundreds of people had joined them and sung and danced in a big circle in a spirit of unity. Swamiji, you should have seen, Brahmananda exclaimed, his voice now exhausted from chanting. It was fantastic, fantastic. Prabhupada looked from one face to another, and he also became like them, elated and hopeful that the chanting could go on like this. They had proved that their chanting of Hare Krishna could lead the love and peace movement. It could grow 101 and hundreds could take part. It is up to you to spread this chanting, Swamiji told them. I am an old man, but you are young and you can do it. October 13th. The village voice ran four large photographs of the Love Beach and Rally. The article stated the backbone of the celebration was the mantras, holy chants from the Sanskrit Bhagavad Gita, and for 3 hours it became like a boat on a sea of rhythmic chanting, led by 15 disciples of Bhaktivedanta Swami, who operates from a storefront on 2nd Avenue. The mantras ebbed and flowed with the rhythm of drums, flutes, and soda-capped tambourines. October 18th. It was Sunday, and again they went to Tompkins Square Park. Swamiji played the bongo as before, striking the drumhead deftly as ever. His nimble fingers created drum rolls as he sat on the rug in the autumn afternoon. His authentic, melodic voice recited the prayers to the previous spiritual masters. Bhakti Vinoda Gaurakishora Bhakti Siddhanta, the centuries old disciplic succession of which he was the living representative now in the 1960s, in this remote part of the world. He sang their names in duty, deference, and love as their servant. He sat surrounded by his American followers under the tall oak tree amid the maze like fences of the park. And the same magic occurred. This time the hippies came by with more ease and familiarity. Allen Ginsberg came again, and 100 others gathered as Prabhupada loudly sang, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Of the hundreds who came by, some stayed briefly and then left. Some decided to listen and chant for a few minutes or even for the entire afternoon. And a few, very few, marked their encounter with the Swami as an unforgettable change in their lives. Bob Correns was looking for the Swami. He was walking with his stylishly dressed wife and 2-year-old son, Eric. Bob was 26 years old and worked as a supervisor in the New York City Welfare Department. He had grown up in Washington, D.C., where he had met his wife. He had a full face and broad forehead, a clear voice, and steady eyes. Bob. After I graduated from George Washington University, I decided to go straight to what I thought was the heart of the material world, New York City, to seek out whatever was the highest truth. I ended up living around the corner from the First East Village head shop. Bob didn't think his job as a social worker really helped anyone. His clients over the years seemed to maintain the same outlook and habits. He and his wife frequented West Village coffee houses, had attended lectures by Larry and Albert on expanded consciousness, and had taken part in a recent peace march. Bob had come to feel that his aspirations for a master's degree and a better apartment were unfulfilling, and he was looking for something more. Bob, I heard about the I Ching, a book that was supposed to chart a person's course in life. So I got someone to do a reading for me. The direction was push upward through darkness. I took it as a good sign, a spiritual sign. Then I purchased the East Village Other and I saw the article entitled Save Earth Now. There was a picture of the Swami. I had read in a book by a Sikh teacher that there could be no higher knowledge without a spiritual master. Every morning on his way to work, Bob used to pass by the Swami's storefront. Curious, he stopped once and peered in the window, only to find an empty room with some straw mats on the floor and one of the Swamiji's boys. Oh, these people are Buddhists, he thought. The door had been open and the boy came over and invited him in. No thanks, he said, thinking. I don't want anything to do with Buddhism. And he went on to his job. In a head shop one day, he had picked up one of the Swami's Bhagavatams and looked through it, but he thought it was too advanced, so he put it back down. After he read the article in the East Village Other, his interest increased. He thought that today might be the last Sunday of chanting in the park before the cold weather came, and so he went to the park hoping to find the Swami and his chanters. His wife was beside him, pushing Eric in a stroller. When he heard the ching ching of the hand cymbals and the chorus of rhythmic chanting from the south side of the park, thinking it must be the Swami, he followed the sound while his wife took Eric to play on the swings. Alone now, Bob drew closer, moving into the crowd until he could see the Kirtan party and the Swami sitting under the tree. Bob stood among a crowd of hundreds, unnoticed. Everything is happening because of me, thought 19-year-old Judy Koslowski. Everything I see is my own creation, and I am the supreme. Everything is mine. As the thought of being God obsessed her, Judy forgot her father and everything else. She was confused. If I am God, why can't I control everything? And why am I so fearful on LSD? Judy was a student at the City College of New York, majoring in art and history. She was taking guitar classes from the Reverend Gary Davis, the blues singer and Christian preacher, who was teaching her the art of sad soul music. Today, however, under the influence of LSD, she had the overwhelming impression that she was God. She had had a fight with her father, who seemed cold and distant to her and couldn't understand her. And she had left his parents' home in the Bronx and traveled downtown. She was going to visit a girlfriend, and Thompson Square Park happened to be on the way. When she reached the park and the kitten was going on, she couldn't see much because of the crowd. She waved her way in closer until she could see some men, one shaven headed, several beard, dancing with upraised hands. And in the center, she saw the Swami sitting on the rug, playing his drum. Dan Clark was 25, thin, intense, horn-rimmed, bespectacled, an avant-garde filmmaker, and his first film was entitled Rebirth. He was a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War and was working at home for children as alternative governmental service. He had been a member of the SDS and the War Resisters League. He had been arrested during a protest demonstration and he had been suspended for 1 week from his job for wearing a peace button and a black armband. He was into Buddhism, but he had lately been adding a little psychedelic seasoning. Everything is nothing and nothing is everything was his slogan. And he would go around chanting it like a mantra. But he was feeling that, at least psychologically, he needed a devotional tonic. His voidism meditation was getting stale. Dan had come to the park today looking for the Swami and the chanting he had read about in the East Village other. He had seen the Swami before, one evening a few months back. He had been waiting for a bus across the street from the Swami's storefront. He was on the way to a rehearsal for a mixed media show, and his friend had gone into Sam's kitchenette for a moment when he noticed that in the storefront an orange robed Indian man with a shaved head was lecturing to a small group of young people. Dan. When I saw him, I imagined myself walking across the street, going into the storefront, sitting down, and renouncing all worldly connections. But I thought to myself, it's only my imagination after all. I'm married and I'm on way to my rehearsal. And I don't know anything about the Swami anyway. So my friend and I got on the bus. But Dan lived only a few blocks away from the storefront, and now and then he would pass by. Once he had stood for several minutes on the sidewalk looking at the cover of the Srimad Bhagavatam taped onto the window. Dan. It showed an oval like lotus with planets around it, and right then I was introduced to the idea of spiritual sensuality. And when I saw the painting of Lord Chaitanya and his associates in the window, that really threw me. I thought, yes, this is what I need juice. Dan and his wife walked the paved pathway through the park. He was looking around for the Swami, but he didn't really know what to look for. He expected to see robes and hear Buddhist style chanting, but he couldn't find anything. He had given up his search and was wandering around to see what musicians were there when he noticed a big crowd gathered around what he figured must have been some magicians. He was attracted by the beat of their music, a chiming 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, a simple rhythm with a kind of flamboyance and very magnetic. He saw an occasional upraised arm above the crowd, and he thought there must be a flamenco dancing going on inside the circle. He then got windy of a drifting melody, certainly not flamenco, which accompanied the beat, and this attracted him further. He approached closer and closer, making his way through the crowd. Then he saw people chanting and others dancing and waving their arms in what he took to a blend of American Indian and Asian dancing. It looked like something from a long forgotten era. Dan decided that this must be the Hare Krishna group. But there were no robes, just the regular dress of the Lower East Side. And where was the Swami? Then he saw him sitting inconspicuous playing a little drum. His eyes were closed and his brow was knit with concentration. Then the Swami wasn't calling attention to himself, and at first I didn't attribute any importance to an elderly Indian man sitting off on one side. He didn't seem to have any special function in the chanting, but it gradually dawned on me who he was. He was the same Swami I had read about in the paper and seen in the storefront. After a while, he spoke, but I couldn't hear him. Still, I was impressed that he was a very modest person, not interested in getting himself up on a pedestal. He didn't go strutting around, but was still with inner peace, strength, and knowledge. Bob, all his disciples were there around his feet. They were chanting, and I tried to chant along and learn the mantra too. I had heard the chanting of Hare Krishna once before at a peace march, and I had found it very beautiful. Then the Swami spoke. I had the impression that this person was not earthly, and I thought, here is the person I am looking for. He seemed to be different from anyone else, like he came from some other place or universe. I was attracted. After the second kirtan, the Swami and his followers rolled up their rug, picked up their instruments, and began to leave. Bob walked back to the swings on the other side of the park to find his wife and child, but the image of the Swami stayed with him. He seemed different from anyone else. His accent had been thick, yet Bob resolved to go to the storefront in a few days to hear him speak. Here is a leader, thought Bob. Dan Judy just stood there hallucinating. She held a Stay High Forever pamphlet in her hand and read it over and over and over. While she was thinking the whole event must have come from another planet, a man walked up and said, would you like to go to where the Swami is? She nodded. At the storefront, one of the devotees offered Judy some prasadam, a chapati, and then invited her up to the Swami's room. Upstairs, she entered the large front room, which was filled with fragrant smoke. There were tall flower vases, and sesame seeds were on the floor. She saw the Swami bow before the little picture of Lord Chaitanya and his associates and then stand and leave the room, closing the door behind him. Judy decided that he must have been bowing to the floor itself. Around her, everyone was softly chanting on beats, and although she couldn't make out the words, it seemed peaceful. One of the Swami's disciples told her she could come into the back room, and she followed, curious. The Swami was sitting there on his mat, looking effulgent. There were about 10 other people in the room. Prabhupada asked if she liked the chanting in the park, and she replied, I loved it. Do you live near here? He asked. Judy flashed on her idea that she was all pervading truth and answered in a way which she thought must have sounded very mystical. Oh, I live very near God, said. Good, said Swamiji. Then you can come to our morning kirtan and class. Then she realized that she didn't live so near and that it would mean traveling an hour and a half from the Bronx to visit the Swami. But she decided that since he had asked her, she would come. Then she thought, I am making this up. But Prabhupada assured her, as if knowing her thoughts, this process is nothing you have made up. It is very old, very simple, and sublime. He leaned back. We are eternal, he said, and everything around us is temporary. Judy was now coming down from the LSD. By the time she left the Swami, it was late. She had wanted to stay overnight, but the boys hadn't allowed her. But she was determined to join. For Bob, it seemed natural to follow up on what he had seen in the park. He began attending the evening classes and he started reading the Bhagavatam at home and chanting. He framed the picture from the Bhagavatam dust jacket depicting the spiritual sky and placed it on his small homemade altar. He would offer flowers before the picture and sit before it, chanting Hare Krishna. Bob was fascinated by the philosophy and the books and classes, And from the very beginning, he was amazed that Swamiji's teachings answered all his questions. He listened carefully and accepted. It seemed like once I had decided that he was telling the truth, I just accepted everything he said. Not that part of it was the truth and the rest of it I would have to think about. October 19th. It was Monday evening after the Sunday Kirtan in the park, and Dan arrived at the storefront for Kirtan. The Kirtan was in full swing, and when he entered, the first thing he noticed was some people playing on the innards of an upright piano leaning against the wall near the door. A boy handed him some wooden sticks, and he sat down and joined in the Kirtan. Then came the Swami's lecture, which Dan thought was long and serious, about how sexual desire causes bondage and suffering. The temple was crowded and stuffed, and Dan was shocked by the lecture. But he stayed on because he knew there would be another kirtan. He felt uneasy that the Swami's followers were all celibate. But because he liked the kirtanas, he resolved to keep coming. The Swami wasn't quite what Dan had expected. He had imagined something of a light-hearted Zen Roshi, laughing and joking, with sparkling eyes and words filled with paradoxes. But he found the Swami just the opposite, very straightforward and even cutting in his speech and his mouth turned down at the corners, making him look mournful. Dan happily took to the kirtanas, thinking they would aid his impersonal meditation, but the lectures kept stressing that God was a person. Dan resisted. He mentally debated with Prabhupada. He was partial to Dr. Radhakrishnan's interpretation of the Gita, and yet the Swami often launched ruthless attacks against such impersonal ideas. Gradually, Dan saw his impersonal barrier crumble, and he came to admit that on every count the Swami was right.
Judy began attending both the morning and evening classes. She had to rise by 5 o'clock to get to the storefront on time, and her mother and father protested. But Judy did not care. She would ride an hour and a half on the subway before the downtown to the Swami's meeting, where she would be the only girl present. When the Swami heard that Judy was an art student, he asked her to paint for Krishna. She set up a canvas in the front room of the apartment, and under his guidance, she began painting. For her first assignment, he asked her to paint a portrait of his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. He gave her a photo and instructed her. There should be a flower garland around Guru Maharaj's neck. The tilak should be yellowish, not white, and there should be no effulgence or halo around his head. Bob. I began chanting and studying the Srimad Bhagavad at home and attending the Kirtan and classes at the storefront. After the last Kirtan in the evening, the Swami would take a bowl made of simulated wood and a little paring knife and a couple of apples that had been sitting on the edge of his lectern. And he would cut the apples up in the little bowl and hand the bowl to a disciple. The disciple would then offer him the first piece and he would pop it into his mouth. The rest of the pieces of apple would be distributed to the crowd. I remember one time when he was chewing on his piece of apple and his seeds out on the floor up against the wall. They bounced off the wall onto the floor next to the dais, and I was thinking, how wonderful! No one else can do that. No one else would have the nerve to do such a thing. With his aesthetic filmmaker's eye, Dan appreciates Swami's manner. Dan, there was a sink right next to the dais where he sat. It was so close that he could have leaned over and touched it. After cutting up an apple, he would take the scrapes and just fling them into sink. It was very casual. I was very impressed by that. And one time, Brahmananda came up and wanted 50 cents for something, and the Swami reached down and picked up his little black purse, the kind that closed by a metal clasp at the top. He snapped it open, looked inside very perspicuously, and then his hand came like a bird, like an eagle hovering in flight above its prey. But he had but the hand did not pounce. It just delicately drifted down, took out a 50-cent piece, and rose up again as if it were being lifted up on a balloon. It was graceful. It was a dance, a ballet. He just picked up this 50-cent piece and lifted it into Brahmananda's hand. I could not believe it. Someone ask you for a 50-cent piece, you just dig in your pocket and throw it at them. But the Swami seemed to treat everything as Krishna's property, and this 50-cent piece was treated with such care. The weeks went by. Some of the devotees had spoken to Bob about initiation, but he was unsure. He did not know exactly what initiation was, but it seemed to him that the other devotees were eager to get him initiated because he was working and a family. To Bob's way of thinking, he represented maturity to them, a middle class American, and they were eager to land him. Bob's wife wasn't interested, and his friends were downright opposed. He could not spend much time with Prabhupada or the devotees, since he was either at the office or at home with his family. Bob, so they were asking me if I was interested in initiation. I said I would think about it. I had not stopped smoking. I had not made the final decision. The first real personal exchange I had with the Swami was when I asked for initiation. The rest of the time I was so much in awe of him that it did not occur to me to say anything. I always wanted to. I felt puffed up and I always thought, well, I should be able to talk to him. Maybe I should do something. But I was always kind of reluctant to do it. I did not think it was my place. I guess maybe I was afraid. But I was getting up early and chanting 32 rounds a day, many of them on the subway. I was afraid of the material world because I did not have much association with the devotees, and I wanted to insulate myself by chanting more. Judy was another person who was considering initiation, and I asked her what she was going to do about it, and she said, I'm thinking about it. And then she told me she had decided she would get initiated and give up all her bad habits. I began to think maybe I could give up these things too. So I asked what to do. How do I approach him? And Kirtananda said, well, you go up to his room. I was surprised it was so easy. I had prepared a little speech in my mind. My dear Swamiji, would you kindly accept me as your disciple and teach me about Krishna consciousness? I went up to his room without an appointment and knocked on the door. I heard him say, come in. I entered the room and he was sitting behind the desk. He was alone. I made obeisances and he looked at me and said, yes. And I said, Swamiji, will you make me your disciple? And that is as far as I got. I was going to say, and teach me the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. But he did not let me finish my speech. He said, yes, it was so simple. I thought, well, there is nothing else to say. He has accepted me. So I thanked him and paid my obeisances and left. You know, You are not supposed to be up here unless you are initiated, Achyutananda said. Judy was flustered. She had come upstairs to put some dirty pots in the kitchen. Oh, yes, she replied. That is just what I wanted to talk to Swamiji about. And she went into Prabhupada's room, where he was talking with a few other people. Swamiji, could I please get initiated? She asked. And he said, do you know the four rules? Yes. Can you follow them? Yes. Then you can be initiated in 2 weeks. Dan was also thinking about initiation, but he wanted to wait. He was chanting 16 rounds and attending all the classes, despite his reluctant wife. He had always had difficulty with authority figures, but he could feel that the Swami was winning him over and wearing down his impersonal barrier. 2 weeks later, Prabhupada held another initiation ceremony. Bob became Rupanuga and Judy became Jadurani. Dan needed a little more time. Chapter 21. Beyond the Lower East Side. But we were shocked that he was going to leave. I never thought that Krishna consciousness would go beyond the Lower East Side. What to speak of New York City? I thought that this was it, and it would stay here eternally. Brahmananda. Hare Krishna was becoming popular. Regular kirtans in the park, newspaper coverage. Haikriva called it the Hare Krishna explosion. The lower east side hippies considered the chanting of Hare Krishna one of the grooviest things happening, and that the Swami's disciples did not take LSD did not seem to affect their popularity. The devotees were accepted as angelic people, carrying the peaceful chanting to others and offering free food and a free place to stay. You could get the most interesting vegetarian food free at that place if you went at the right time. And in their storefront on the shelf by the door were books from India. In the clubs, local musicians played the melody that they had picked up from the Swami when he chanted in the park and at the temple. The Lower East Side was a neighborhood of artists and musicians, and now it was also the neighborhood of Hare Krishna. Cotton Green. Musicians were influenced by it. The Krishna chant, Govinda Jaya Jaya, and other chants. I used some of those chants when I recorded. A lot of musicians reached out for this in different ways. We would explode in a short time and blow off, but then keep the chant underneath as a basis. A lot of people found that spiritual vibration even in the midst of the heavy music they were doing. They were becoming devotee musicians. Evening kirtans were always big. Brahmananda used to stand by the back door every night and watch the room fill up until there was no place left to sit. There was a lot of interest in the group, chanting and music making. But after Kirtan, when the talk was too big, people would start to leave. It was not uncommon for half the audience to leave before the talk began. And sometimes people would leave in the middle of the lecture. One evening, Ellen Ginsberg brought Ed Sanders and Thule Kofferberg of the Fugs to the meeting. The Pugs, a local group that had made a name for themselves, specialized in obeisant lyrics. Among the popular songs of Ed Sanders were Slum Goddess of the Lower East Side, Group, and I Cannot Get High. Ed had wild red chair and an electric red beard, and he played a regular guitar during the kirtan. The devotees were happy to see their prestigious guest. The night of the Pugs, however, Prabhupada chose to speak on the illusion of sexual pleasure. Sex pleasure binds us to this material world, birth after birth, he said, and he quoted, as he often did, a verse of Monacharya. Since I have become Krishna conscious, whenever I think of sex life with a woman, my face at once turns from it, and I spit at the thought. The fox never returned. To speak ill of sexual pleasure was certainly not a strategic move for one who wanted to create followers among the lower East Side hippies. But Prabhupada never considered changing his message. In fact, when Umapati had mentioned that Americans did not like to hear that sex was only for conceiving children, Prabhupada had replied, I cannot change the philosophy to please the Americans. What about sex? Asked the ISKCON attorney, Steve Goldsmith, one evening speaking out from the rear of the crowded temple. Sex should only be with one's wife, Prabhupada said, and that is also restricted. Sex is for the propagation of Krishna conscious children. My spiritual master used to say that to be get Krishna conscious children, he was prepared to have sex 100 times. Of course, that's the most difficult in this age. Therefore, he remained a brahmachari. But sex is a very strong force, Mr. Goldsmith challenged. What a man feels for a woman is undeniable. Therefore, in every culture, there is the institution of marriage. Prabhupada replied, you can get yourself married and live peacefully with one woman, but the wife should not be used as a machine for sense gratification. Sex should be restricted to once a month and only for the propagation of children. Hygriva, who was seated just to Swami's left, beside the large dangling symbol, spoke out suddenly. Only once a month? And with a touch of visitous humor, he added, better to forget the whole thing. Yes, that is it. Very good boy. Swamiji laughed and other joined him. It is best not to think of it. Best just to chant the Hare Krishna. And he held up his hands as if he were chanting an stand-up beats. That way we will be saved from so much botheration. Sex is like the itching sensation, that's all. And as when we scratch, it gets worse. So we should tolerate the itching and ask Krishna to help us. It is not easy. Sex is the highest pleasure in the material world, and it is also the greatest bondage. But Steve Goldsmith was shaking his head. Prabhupada looked at him, smiling. There is still a problem? It is just that, well, it has been proved dangerous to repress the sex drive. There is theory that we have wars because people are eating meat. Prabhupada interrupted. As long as people eat meat, there will be a war. And if a man eats meat, he will be sure to have illicit sex also. Steve Goldsmith was an influential friend and supporter of ISKCON, but Prabhupada would not change the philosophy of Krishna consciousness to please Americans. Judson Hall on West 57th Street cost $200 to rent for one night. Raya Rama thought it was time Swamiji tried reaching some other more sophisticated New Yorkers. And since Judson Hall was near Carnegie Hall and sometimes had interesting concerts and lectures, he thought it would be a good place to start. Swamiji agreed to the idea, and Raya Rama printed an announcement which he distributed in the midtown bookstores. On the night of the event, the divers paraded through the midtown entertainment areas, beating a bass drum and handing out leaflets. Then they returned to Judson Hall for the program. Only 7 people attended. The divorce felt terrible. They had misled Swamiji and spent the equivalent of a month's rent. We can cancel the program if you like, Swamiji. Rayaram said, but Prabhupada replied, no, let us chant and speak. So the divorce took the stage and chanted with Swamiji and danced, and then sat beside him as he lectured, his voice echoing through the empty hall. Afterwards, Swamiji called for questions. and a young man, about 15, vacant rows back, asked whether he was correct in understanding that the Swami's philosophy was primarily for reforming destitute young people. No, Prabhupada replied, everyone in this material world is lost and destitute, even the so-called successful person, because everyone has forgotten Krishna. After the program, Swamiji sat in a chair by the exit as the few members of the audience were leaving. A respectful looking couple introduced themselves, and Swamiji sat up very straight with folded palms and smiled. Brahmananda's mother was present, and Swamiji was very cordial to her. But in general, the devotees were depressed at the small turnout. I'm sorry, Swamiji. We invited you here and almost no one came. Raya Rama apologized, but Prabhupada raised his eyebrows and said, no one? You did not say Narada? You did not say Lord Brahma? When there is chanting of Hare Krishna, even the demigods come to participate. Back at the temple, Prabhupada chided Raya Rama. I told you we should have charged money. When something is free, people think it is worthless. But just charge $3 or $5, and people will think, oh, you're offering some very valuable thing. In Bengal, there is a story of a man who went house to house offering free mangoes, and no one would take his mangoes because everyone thought, oh, why is he giving away these mangoes? There must be something wrong with them. So he charged 3 rupees, and then they thought, these look like good mangoes. The price is only 3 rupees. All right. So when people see that something is free, they think it is worthless. Charge them some money and they'll think it is very nice. Button Green was a musician fond of the Swami and fond of banging on the innards of the piano in the temple during Kirtan. Button Green. We had a really explosive thing to break out of with this capitalistic, materialistic egg sitting on us. So there was so much ferocity in the music to break out of. But spinning about out like that, you could have a nervous breakdown. So it was great to go to the Swamis and chant in a small storefront on second avenue. The streets were full of Maya and perversion, and this was a place to really mellow it. It was great to chant there to balance my life. It was great to sit and have prasad with the Swami and get some real authentic Indian cooking and chapatis and talk about things, especially when I had very little money in my pocket. It was always nice to go. When Burton asked Prabhupada to attend his piano recital at Town Hall Theatre, Prabhupada agreed. Brahmananda, about 7 or 8 of us in our sneakers and jeans had ridden, ridden on the subway Swamiji to Town Hall. We went in and took our seats, and the concert began. Button Green came out, opened the piano top, took a hammer, and began wildly hitting the strings inside the piano. And it went on for an hour and a half. We were all sitting there at Swamiji, and we all began chanting on our beats. There were only about 2 dozen people in the whole theater. Then the intermission came, and Swamiji wanted to go to the toilet, and I went along and helped him, turning on the water in a sink, getting a paper towel for him. Doing these little services for Swami seemed like the perfection of my life. There was something so great about him, and that just doing those things was my perfection. And I felt like I was protecting him, like I was his personal bodyguard. Coming up on the subway, I had shown him how the subway worked and answered his questions. It all seemed very intimate. Anyway, we went back upstairs to our seats, and Button Green came right up to Swamiji saying, Swamiji, are you happy? Are you comfortable? Do you like it? And Swamiji was very polite and said, Yes. Then Button said, Now the second part is coming. I interrupted and tried to say that Swamiji is very tired and he takes rest at 10. It was already after 10, so I said, we had to go back, but he pressed Swamiji to stay for second half, and so we had to stay. Then the poets came out and recited poetry. We were there until 11:30, and then we had to ride back on subway. But a few years later, I learned that Prabhupada had another reason for going to town hall. He was thinking of renting it for a temple, and he wanted to see it. The Gate Theatre was a small auditorium on Second Avenue, about 10 blocks north of the storefront. Sat Satswarupa. We rented the Gate Theatre for one night. It was a dark place, painted all black. The theatre was almost empty. We had an easel on stage with a painting of the Panchatattva. Swamiji spoke, and his talk became very technical, pointing and referring back to the painting. He described each member of the Panchatattva. He first explained that Lord Chaitanya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appearing as a pure devotee. Lord Nityananda, to the right of Lord Chaitanya, is his first expansion, and to the right of Lord Nityananda is Advaita, who is the incarnation of Supreme Lord. To the left of the Lord Chaitanya, he said, is Gadadhar, the internal energy, and Srivasa is the perfect devotee. During the talk, I was thinking that this was maybe too elevated for the audience, but I was sitting close beside Swamiji, and like the other devotees, I was really enjoying being with him. After the gate engagement, Swamiji and his disciples agreed that it was a waste of time trying to rent theaters. It was better to go to Tompkins Square Park. That was the best place for attracting people, and it did not cost anything. It was 11 p.m. and only one light was on Swamiji's apartment. In the kitchenette, Swamiji was staying up, teaching Kirtananand and Brahman how to cook, because the next day, Sunday, they would be holding a feast for the public. Kirtananand had suggested it may be advertised as a love feast, and Swamiji had adopted this name, although some thought it sounded strange at first to hear him say love feast. The devotees had put up posters around the neighborhood and had made a sign for the window of the storefront. And Swamiji had said he would cook enough for at least 50 people. He said the love feast should become an important part of ISKCON. As he had explained many times, food offered to Krishna becomes spiritual, and whoever eats the prasadam receives great spiritual benefit. Prasadam meant mercy. His two helpers stood respectfully beside him, sometimes stepping back out of his way as he moved, and sometimes looking over his shoulder as he mixed spices or set a pan over the flame or called for another ingredient. He was stirring a big pot of sweet rice with a wooden spoon. It had to be stirred constantly and slowly adding milk. If the sweet rice burnt, it would be ruined. He said, and he handed the spoon to Kirtanananda. He next showed them how to make ghee by heating butter in a wok and separating the milk solids from the butter fat. And he simultaneously taught them how to make apple chutney. Prabhupada was silent as he cooked, but when Brahmananda asked him how he had learned so much of cooking, Prabhupada said that he had learned by watching his mother. He laughed and said it had not been like it is in the West, where you take a lump of flesh from a refrigerator, throw it in a pan, boil it, sprinkle it with salt, and then eat like an animal. And in Korea, he said, they eat dogs, but human beings should eat grains, fruits, vegetables, and milk. And cow, especially, should not be killed. While Brahmananda cut the apples for the chutney and put them in a pot for steaming, and Kirtanananda stirred the sweet rice. Swamiji prepared masala, the basic mixture of spices, which he would soon add to the steaming apples. The familiar smell of red pepper and cumin seeds entered their nostrils sharply as the masala crackled and smoked in the hot ghee in the tiny frying pan, with three separate operations going at once. Sweet rice, steaming apples, and masala. Prabhupada cautioned Kirtananda to stir the sweet rice steadily and scrape the bottom of the pot. And he took the spoon, took the spoon for a moment from Kirtan's hand and demonstrated how to stir it properly. Sweet rice, chutney, and certain other dishes could be made in advance of the feast, he explained, but many things would have to be done the next morning. Prabhupada rose early, despite having kept late hours the night before, and after the morning class, he was back in the kitchen. Now, half a dozen disciples sat in his front room, making dough for puris and samosas. He had shown them how to make the dough, and Umapati had kneaded for a while by pounding the soft dough with his fist. But Brahmananda was better at it, socking the weight of his restless body into the large lump of dough. As Swamiji entered the room to examine the quality of the puris, his disciples looked up at him respectfully. They were always serious when he was present. He picked up a puri and exclaimed, "Did not to be standard," he said, "but it will have to do." Then amid crumpled rejects and oddly shaped pieces of dough, he squatted down beside his helper, who were trying as best they could, though making a mess. He took a small ball of dough, pressed it flat with his fingers, and then deftly rolled it out until it curled around the wooden pin and then fell off. A perfectly round puri. He held it up, displaying a translucent thin, but not too thin, patty of dough. Make them like this, he said, but hurry. On discovering that the dough was too stiff, so Amiji added a little ghee and then a little milk and kneaded the dough to softer mixture. Everything should be just right, he said, and his disciples took to their menial tasks with a concentrated earnestness. Who among them had ever heard of these things before? Puris and samosas? It was all new, and the challenge something very important. It was a part of devotional service. Swamiji did much of the cooking as he simultaneously supervised his helpers. He was always near, walking barefoot back to the kitchen, then to the front room, then to his own room in the rear. And even when he went to his back room, his disciples could see him through the window in the wall. Swamiji saw each other nearly 1 dozen dishes through its final stages, and his disciples carried them into the front room in pots, one by one, and placed them before the picture of Lord Chaitanya. There was a halwa, dal, two sabjis, fancy rice, puri, samosas, sweet rice, apple chutney, and gulab jamuns are sweet balls, ISKCON bullets. Prabhupada had personally spent much time slowly deep frying the sweet balls on a low heat until they had turned golden brown and full. Then one by one he had lifted them out of the ghee with a slaughter spoon and put them to soak in sugar syrup. He recognized that this golden ghee fried milk balls soaked with sugar water were his disciples' favorite prasad and treat. He then called them ISKCON bullets because they were weapons in the war against Maya. He even allowed that a jar of ISKCON bullets floating in their syrup be always on hand in the room. where his disciples could take them without asking permission and without observing any regulated hours. They could take as many as they liked. Ethananda brought in the samosa filling, which he had prepared from spinach and green peas, cooked to a paste and which the Swamiji had heavily spiced. Stuffing the samosas was an art, and Swamiji showed them how to do it. He took a semicircle of the dough, shaped it into a cone, and stuffed it with a spoonful of filling, and then folded the top over and sealed it. A samosa ready for the hot game. Achyutananda carried the imperfectly shaped puris into the kitchen, where he and Kirtananda deep fried them two at a time. With the temperature of the ghee, the consistency of the dough, and the size, shape, and thickness of puris were all just right. The puris would cook in only a few seconds, rising to the surface of the ghee, where they would inflate like little balloons. The cooks then store them on the edge in the cardboard box to drain out the excess ghee. As they completed the last preparation for the feast, Swami's disciples washed the stiff dough from their hand and went down to the storefront, where they sat on the straw mats and awaited the guests from the feast. Upstairs, Swamiji and a couple of his cooks offered all the preparation to Lord Chaitanya, reciting the Parampara prayers. The first few love feasts were not very well attended, but the devotees were so enthusiastic about feast prasad that they showed no discrimination over the scarcity of guests. They were prepared to eat anything. Satsurupa. There was something called Brahmananda spaghetti, which was rice flour noodles cooked in ghee and soaked in sugar water. And there was halwa, Pushpanna rice with fried cheese balls, samosas, split mung beans fried into crunchy pellets and mixed with salt and spices, puris, gulab jamuns, and everything was succulent. That was the word Haigreva said. Yes, he would say, especially to Vaiglash, everything was very succulent. Eating the feast was an intense experience. We were supposed to be subduing our senses all week, following strict regulation, controlling the tongue, and the feast was a kind of reward. Swamiji and Krishna were giving us a taste of full spiritual ecstasy, even though we were still beginners and still in the material world. Before taking my plateful, I would pray. Please let me remain Krishna consciousness because it is so nice and I am so far. Let me serve Swamiji and let me now enjoy this feast in transcendental bliss. And I would begin eating, going from one taste sensation to other. The the good rice, the favorite vegetable, the bread, and saving the gulab jamun for last thinking. I can have seconds if I like, thirds. We will keep our eyes on the big pots, confident that there was as much as we wanted. It was a time of rededication. We all enjoyed it completely open relish and sense gratification. Eating was very important. Gradual attendance picked up. The feasts were free and they were reputed to be delicious. Mostly local hippies came, but occasionally a higher class of experimenting New Yorkers or even the parents of one of the devotees would come. When the small temple was filled, guests would sit in the courtyard. They would take their prasadam laden paper plate and their wooden spoons in the backyard garden and sit beneath the fire escape or at the picnic table or anywhere. And after eating, they would go back in the storefront for more. Devotees were stationed behind the pot of prasad, and the guests would come by for seconds. The other tenants were not very happy about seeing the quoted full of festive guests, and the devotees tried to pacify them by bringing them plates of prasad. Although Swamiji would not go down to the temple, he would take a plate in his room and hear with pleasure about the success of his new program. One night, the devotees were eating so ravenously that they threatened to eat everything available before the guests had all been served, and Kirtan had to admonish them for their selfish attitude. Gradually, they were understanding the Sunday feast was not just for their fun and pleasure, but to bring people to Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada had begun Back to God at Magazine India. Although he had been writing articles since 1930s, it was in 1944 in Calcutta that he had single-handedly begun the magazine in response to his spiritual master request that he preach Krishna consciousness in English. It had been with great difficulty that through his pharmaceutical business he had managed to gather the 400 rupees a month for printing, and he had single-handedly written, edited, published, financed, and distributed each issue. In those early years, Back to Godhead had been Prabhupada's major literary work and preaching mission. He had envisioned widespread distribution of the magazine, and he had thought of plans for spreading the message of Lord Chaitanya all over the world. He had drawn up a list of major countries and the number of copies of Back to Godhead he wanted to send to each. He sought donations to finance this project, but help was scarce. Then in 1959, he had turned his energies toward writing and publishing the Srimad Bhagavatam. But now he wanted to revive Back to Godhead, and this time it would not be done single handedly. This time he would give the responsibility to his disciples. Garg Short, now Gargamuni, since his recent initiation, found a press. A country club in Queens was trying to sell its small AB Dick press. Prabhupada was interested, and he rode out to Queens in a borrowed van with Gargamuni and Ketan to see the machine. It was old, but in good condition. The manager of the country club wanted 250 of it. Prabhupada looked over the machine carefully and talked with the manager, telling him of his spiritual mission. The manager mentioned a second press he had on hand and explained that neither machine was actually of any use to him. So Prabhupada said he would pay the 250 per month, both machines. The country club did not really need them, and besides, the manager should help out, since Prabhupada had an important spiritual message to print for the benefit of all humanity. The man agreed. Prabhupada and Gargamuni and Kirtananda load both machines to the van, and ISKCON had its printing press. Srila Prabhupada gave over the editorship of Back to God at Magazine Griva and Raya Raman. For so many years, he had taken Back to Godhead as his personal service to his spiritual master. But now he would let young men like Haigreva, the college English teacher, and Rama Raya, the professional writer, take up Back to God in magazine as their service to their spiritual master. In short time, Haigreva and Raya Rama had compiled the first issue and were ready to print. It was an off night, no public kirtan and lecture, and Swamiji was up in his room working on his translation of Srimad Bhagavatam. Downstairs, the printing of the first issue had been going on for hours. Rayarama had typed the stencils, and during the printing, he had stood nervously over the machine, examining the printing quality of each page, stroking his hand and murmuring, "Hmm, now it is time to collect and staple each magazine." The stencils had lasted 100 copies, and 100 copies each of them 28 pieces, and the front and back were now lined up along two of the unvarnished benches Raphael had made the summer. A few devotees collected and stapled the magazine in an assembly line, walking along the stacks of pages, taking one page under another until they reached the end of the page and gave the assembled stack of pages to Kalkamani, who stood up brushing his long hair out of his eyes, stapling each magazine with the stapler and staples Brahmananda had brought from his Board of Education office. Even Aikriva, who usually did not volunteer for menial activities, menial duties, was there walking down the line, collating. Suddenly, the side door opened, and to their surprise, they saw Swami looking in at them. Then he opened the door wide and entered the room. He had never come down like this on an off night before. They felt an unexpected flush of emotion and love for him. Then they dropped down on their knees, bowing their heads to the floor. No, no, he said, raising his hand to stop them. And some were still bowing, and others already rising to their feet. Continue what you're doing. When they stood up and saw him standing with them, they weren't sure what to do, but obviously he had come down to see them progressing back to God and magazine. So they continued working silently and efficiently. Prabhupada walked down the row of the pages, his hand and wrist extending gracefully from the folds of his shawl as he touched a stack of pages and then finished magazine. His compress his head. Jagannath had designed the cover using a pen and ink drawing of Radha and Krishna, similar to his painting in the temple. It was a simple drawing set with a pattern of concentric circles. The first page opened with the same motto Prabhupada had used for his on his back to Godhead. Godhead is light, essence is darkness. When there is Godhead, there is no essence. And on the same page, Hygriva had not been able to resist giving a quotation from William Blake, approved by Swamiji, which sustained the philosopher Krishna consciousness. God appears and God is a light to those poor souls who dwell in the night. But does a human form display to those who dwell in realms of death? Although the editorial spoke of Blake, William, and Jesus Christ, it stressed it is to teach the science of devotion to God that Swami Bhaktivedanta had come to America. His message is simple: the chanting of the holy name of God, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Following the orders of his spiritual master, his divine bliss, Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, Swami Bhakti Vedanta began the initial publication of Back to God in 1944. This bi-monthly published from 1944 to 1950 in Vrindavan, India, established Swami Bhakti Vedanta as the leading personalist in India. This issue marked the first publication of Back to Godhead in the West. The main article, a summary of lecture given of Prabhupada, was based on notes taken by Umapati. It has been said that when we wake up and where we go to sleep, We should beat our mind 1,000 times the show. When the mind says things like, why sing Hare Krishna? Why not take LSD? We should beat it with the same shoe. However, if we always think of Krishna, no beating will be necessary. The mind will be our best friend. And there was an article by Hygriva, flip out and stay. Hygriva had quoted liberally from Hart Flynn and Hart Whitman. No wonder so many young colleagues, no wonder so many young collegiates are trying to flip out permanently on super drugs. Perhaps this is their way of saying, we don't want any part of this hell you have made for yourself. So they use psychedelics as a springboard to propel themselves into different realms. But the drug flip is only temporary. It is temporary because it is artificial. One really begins to wonder where all these scripts are leading. Haikriva concludes that Krishna Kirtan is the quickest way to flip out without coming down. Your associates will think you mad. That is the first sign of progress. Just let others be mad for Maya, the old ephemeral lures of women and gold. But you be mad instead of the reality. In the back of the magazine was an ad for Swamiji's essays. Krishna, the reservoir of pleasure, and who is crazy, and a notice. Soon to be printed, Gita Upanishad or Bhagavad Gita as it is translated and with commentaries by Swami Bhaktivedanta. Prabhupada's first and main instruction to his editors had been that they should produce the magazine regularly every month, even if they did not know how to sell the copies or even if they only turned out 2 pages, they had to continue bearing the standard. He called Haigrave to his room and presented him a complete 3-volume set of his Srimad Bhagavatam. On the front page of each volume, he had written, to Srimad Haigreva Das Brahmachari with my blessings. A.C. Bhaktivinoda Swami. Haigreva was grateful and mentioned that he had not been able to afford them. That's all right, Prabhupada said. Now you compile this back to God and work sincerely and make it as big as Time magazine. Prabhupada wanted all his disciples to take part in it. Don't be dull, he said. Write something. He wanted to give his disciples back to God for their own preaching. Brahmananda and Karkamani took the first issues out that same night on bicycles, riding to every head shop on the lower east side, all the way to 14th Street as far as west at the West Village, until they had distributed all 100 issues. This was an increase in the preaching. Now all students could take part in the work, typing, editing, writing, assembling, selling. It was his preaching, of course, but he wasn't alone anymore. Over a short 4 months, the society had expanded sufficiently to warrant larger quarters than the small Second Avenue storefront temple. Stated the editorial in the second issue of the Back to Garden. Prabhupada had not abandoned his idea for a big building in New York City. Greenwich Village real estate was too expensive, and Midtown was out of the question. But Prabhupada still said he wanted to buy a building. It was difficult for his followers to think of Krishna consciousness as anything more than a lower east side movement. Because who but the people of the lower east side would be interested in Krishna consciousness. And anyway, we had money to buy a building in Manhattan. But one day, Ravindra Swarup had happened to meet someone, a wealthy Jewish here who was sympathetic toward youth movements, who agreed to loan Swamiji $5,000. Ravindra Swarup had arranged the loan and Swamiji had designated the money as his building fund, to which he had gradually added another $5,000 that he had collected through through incidental donation. But it is suitable building starting at $100,000. Even the sums seemed petty. Swamiji went with Brahmana to look at a building on 6th Street that had previously been the Jewish Providential Bank. It had a large lobby with a mezzanine, marble floors, and the atmosphere of a temple. Brahmananda suggested that the wall area could be remodeled for use as a dormitory, and Swamiji considered the mezzanine for his own apartment. The large lobby set could be used for kirtan and lectures. On leaving the building, however, Papa noted that it is located on the corner by a bus stop. It would not be a good location. The Gaudiya Mutt branch at Bhag Bazaar in Calcutta, he said, was also located at a bus stop. The noisy engines of these buses is as they started up created disturbance. Papa next looked at the temple Emmanuel, also on 6th Street of the Lower East Side. It was even larger than the bank building, and when some of Swami's disciples walked through the cavernous empty rooms, they became bewildered to think how even if they could get such a place, they would be able to manage or use it. He visited the other place of one so neglected and in such poor repair that it looked as though it had been vandalized, and another in similar condition, filled with lumber stacked almost to the ceiling. He asked Rupam, who had accompanied him, what he thought, and Rupam said, "Too much time, too much time and money to fix it up." So they left. Swamiji returned to his room and went to the bathroom where he washed his feet in the tub. He said that it was an Indian custom that after walking outside, you wash your feet. Then the devotees met Mr. Prince, an elegantly dressed real estate agent. "We have a handful of stars," Mr. Prince told Brahmananda. "We are incorporated as a tax-free religious organization. We have no idea how much money this will save. So many people have to vacate just because they cannot pay their taxes, but someone up there is looking after you people, and I have just a place for you and your Swami." Mr. Prince showed Brahmananda a handsome three-story building near St. Mark's Place. It was a good downtown location near the young people, yet in an area where the uptown people would feel safe. The floors were polished and hardwood. All the doors were ornately hand carved, and it had a large hall suitable for a temple. The Marquis the Marquis de Lafayette had stayed here during his visit in 1824, a fact that attended to the building's charm and prestige.
Shri Prabhupada Lilamrta. Continuing from chapter 21, volume 1. One evening, Mr. Price visited Prabhupada up in his room. Prabhupada sitting on the floor behind his desk, and Mr. Price sitting on a metal folding chair. Mr. Price wore an elegant suit and a white dress shirt with cufflinks and starched cuffs. His expensive dress, meticulously tanned face, and blonde hair, which some devotees thought was a wig, contrasted strangely with Swami's simplicity. Mr. Price kept referring to Swamiji as Your Excellency, and he expressed much appreciation of Swamiji's work. He spoke optimistically about how, through his connections, he hoped to save Prabhupada a lot of money and trouble and get him just the place he wanted. Accompanied by a few disciples, Prabhupada went to Mr. Price to see the building. While Mr. Price, the devotees, and the custodians of the house were all talking together in a group, Prabhupada wandered off unnoticed to a corner of the room where there was an old-fashioned sewing machine. He began pressing the treadle and examining the working of the machine. As Prabhupada rejoined the group, Mr. Price said, "If you can just get $5,000 down, I can get the owners to draw up a contract. $5,000 down and another 5,000 within 2 months. That shouldn't be so difficult." Prabhupada liked the building and told Brahmananda they should purchase it. Brahmananda was inclined to turn the money over right away, but Prabhupada said that first a suitable contract had to be drawn up. Mr. Price talked to the devotees in private, speaking in the Swami's interest and in the interest of the spiritual movement, and he seemed to be promising them something even more than a contract. Perhaps he would give them the buildings. It didn't make sense that he could give the building, but he told them something like that. He wanted the devotees to think of him as their friend, and he invited them over to his house one evening. When the devotees gathered in his house, sitting stiffly on chairs in his living room, which was lined with bookcases filled not with books, but with two-dimensional designs depicting rows of books, he continued to flatter them. He praised Hayagriva's writing, and Hayagriva was obviously embarrassed and flattered. He praised everything about the devotees. He also spoke of how his dog had recently died and said the house seems empty without the little fellow. He was an unusual man, effeminate, and full of flattery and praises. Prabhupada remained reserved after his first meeting with Mr. Price, though he was interested in getting the building if the proper arrangement could be made. Brahmananda continued to negotiate with Mr. Price, and soon, according to Mr. Price, the owners of the building would be expecting the devotees to give proof of their ability to meet the payments. On Prabhupada's direction, the devotees hired a lawyer to go over the contract. "This Mr. Price is causing us too much pain," Prabhupada said. "What is the difficulty?" He didn't see the necessity for Mr. Price at all. Why don't we purchase directly from the owners? Why all these agents? "It's the way it's done here," Brahmananda said. Alan Coleman was a record producer. He had read the article in the East Village Other about the Swami from India and the mantra he had brought with him. When he had read the Hare Krishna mantra on the front page, he had become attracted. The article gave the idea that one could get a tremendous high or ecstasy from chanting. The Swami's Second Avenue address was given in the article. So one night in November, Alan and his wife visited the storefront. Alan's. There were about 30 pairs of shoes in the back of the room, people in the front and shoes in the back. We took off our shoes and sat down. Everyone was seated and very quiet. Front and center was a chair, and everyone was staring at this chair. Even then, we felt a certain energy in the room. No one was saying anything, and everyone was staring at the chairs. The next thing was our first sight of the Swami. He came and sat down on the chair, and there was a tremendous surge of energy.
The Swami began chanting, and it was very beautiful sound. Swamiji had this little drum he was hitting, very penetrating and exciting. One of the devotees was holding up a sign with the chant written on it so everyone could follow. Then the devotees got up and danced in a circle, a special dance with steps to it. The Swami was looking around the room and he seemed to smile as he looked at you, as if to encourage you to join. The next day, Alan phoned Prabhupada to propose that he make a record of the chanting. But it was Brahmananda who answered the phone, and he gave Alan an appointment with Swami that evening. So again, Alan and his wife went down to the East Village, which to them was the neighborhood where things were happening. If you wanted to have some excitement, you went down to the East Village. When they entered the Swami's room, he was seated at his typewriter working. As soon as Alan mentioned his idea about making a record, Prabhupada was interested. Yes, he said, we must record. If it will help us distribute the chanting of Hare Krishna, then it is our duty. They scheduled the recording for 2 weeks later in December at the Adelphi recording studio near Times Square. Alan's wife was impressed by how enthusiastically the Swami had gotten to the point of making the record. He had so much energy and ambition in his plans. It was the night before the recording date. A boy walked into the storefront for the evening kirtan carrying a large two-headed Indian drum. This was not unusual, as guests often brought drums, flutes, and other instruments. Yet this time, Swamiji seemed particularly interested. The boy sat down and was preparing to play when Prabhupada motioned for the boy to bring him the drum. The boy didn't move. He wanted to play it himself, but Ramananda went over and said, Swamiji wants to play the drum. So the boy gave in. Brahmananda. Swamiji began to play, and his hands were just dancing on the drum. Everyone was stunned that Swami knew how to do this. All we had seen was the bongo drum. So I thought it was proper Indian drum. But when this two-headed drum came out of nowhere and Prabhupada started playing it like a master musician, it created an ecstasy 100 times more than the bongo drum had. After the kirtan, Prabhupada asked the boy if he could borrow the drum for the recording session the next night. The boy at first was reluctant, but the devotees promised to return his drum the next day. So he agreed and he would bring the drum the next evening. And he left the storefront that night with his drum under his arm. The devotees thought they would never see the boy or his drum again. But the next day, a few hours before Swami G was to leave for the studio, the boy returned with his drum. It was a cold December night. The Swami, dressed in his unusual saffron dhoti, a tweed overcoat, and a pair of gray shoes, which had long since replaced his original white pointy rubber ones, got into Rupanuga's VW van with about 15 of his followers and the instruments and started for the recording studio. Brahmananda. We didn't start recording right away because there was a group ahead of us. So we went out for a walk in Times Square. We were just standing there with Swamiji, seeing all the flashing lights and all the sense gratification when a woman came up to Swamiji and said, Oh, hello, where did you come from? In a very loud, metrolly way. And the Swami said, I'm a monk from India. And she said, Oh, that's wonderful. Glad to meet you. And then she shook Swamiji's hand and left. At the studio, everyone accepted the devotees as a regular music group. One of the rock musicians asked them what the name of their group was, and Haigriva laughed and replied, the Hare Krishna chanters. Of course, most of the devotees weren't actually musicians, and yet the instrument they brought with them, a tambura, a large harmonium, loaned by Ginsberg, and rhythm instruments, were once they had played during kirtan for months. So as they entered the studio, they felt confident that they could produce their own sound. They just followed their Swami. He knew how to play, and they knew how to follow him. They weren't just another music group. It was music, but it was also chanting, meditation, worship. Prabhupada sat on a mat in the center of the studio while the engineers arranged the microphones, and assigned each devotee a place to sit according to his particular instrument. They asked only for 2 pairs of kartals, and they approved of the pairs of rhythms sticks, but they wanted several devotees clapping their hands. Rupanaga's usual instrument was a pair of brass Indian bells with the tongues removed, and when the engineers saw them, he came over and said, "Let me hear that." Rupanaga played and they passed. Since Ravindra Swarup would be playing the drone on the harmonium, he sat apart with his own microphone, and Kirtanananda also had a microphone from the tambura. When the engineers were satisfied, they cued the devotees and began chanting and playing his drum. The cymbals and sticks and clapping hands joined. The chanting went on steadily for about 10 minutes until an engineer came out of the glass studio and stopped them. Brahmananda was clapping too loudly, creating an imbalance. The engineer went back into his studio, put on his earphones, balanced everyone, and cued them for a second take. This time, it was better. The first sound was the tambura when it plucked reverberating twang. An instant later, Swamiji began beating the drum and singing Vandeham Shri Guru. And then the whole ensemble put out to sea. The tambura, the harmonium, the clackers, the cymbals, Rupanuga's bells, and Swamiji's solo singing, pushing off their mourning into a fair weather sea of chanting. Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam Sha. Swamiji's voice in the studio was very sweet. His voice was feeling love, not just making a record. There was a feeling of success and union, a crowning evening to all their months together. Sri Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda. After a few minutes of singing prayers alone, Swamiji paused briefly while the instrument continued pulsing and began the mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. It was pure Bhaktivedanta Swami, expert, just like his cooking in the kitchen, like his lectures. The engineers liked what they heard. It would be a good take if nothing went wrong. The instruments were all right, the drum, the singing, the harmony was rough. But this was a special record, a happening. The Hare Krishna chanters were doing their thing, and they were doing it all right. Alan Coleman was excited. Here was an authentic sound. Maybe it would sell. After a few rounds of the mantra, the devotees began to feel relaxed as though they were back in the temple. They were able to forget about making mistakes on the record. They just chanted, and the beats steadied into a slightly faster pace. The word Hare would come sometimes with a little shout in it, but there was no emotional theatrics in the chorus, just a straight response to Swami's melody. 10 minutes went by, the chanting went faster, louder, and faster. Swamiji doing more fancy things on the drum until suddenly everything stopped with the droning note of the harmonium lingering. Alan came out of the studio. It was great, Swami, great. Would you like to just go right ahead and read the address now? Or are you too tired? With a polite concern, the freckled Alan Kelman peered through his thick glasses at the Swami. Swamiji appeared tired, but he replied, "No, I'm not tired." Then the devotee sat back in the studio to watch and listen as Prabhupada read his prepared statement. As explained on the cover of the record album, the sympathetic devotees thought that Swami, despite his accent, sounded perfectly clear. Reading from his script like an elocutionist, this transcendental vibration by chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, is the sublime method for reviving our Krishna consciousness. The language was philosophic, and the kind of people who usually walked out of the temple as soon as the kirtans ended, before the Swami could even speak a word, would also not appreciate this speech on their record album. As living spirit souls, Swamiji preached, we are all originally Krishna conscious entities, but due to our association with matter from time immemorial, our consciousness is now polluted by material atmosphere. The devotees listen submissively to the words of their spiritual master. while at the same time trying to comprehend the effect this would have on the audience. Certainly, some people would turn it off at the very mention of a spiritual nature. Swamiji continued reading, explaining that the chanting would deliver one from the sensual, the mental, and the intellectual planes and bring one to the spiritual realm. We have seen it practically, he continued. Even a child can take part in the chanting, or even a dog can take part in it. The chanting should be heard, however, from the lips of a pure devotee of the Lord. He continued reading on to the end. No other means, therefore, of spiritual realization is as effective in this age as chanting the Maha Mantra Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Alan again came rushing out of the studio. It was fine, he said. He explained that they had recorded a little echo into the speech. It makes it special for the listener. Now he pushed back his glasses with his finger. We have got about 10 minutes left on the side with the speech. Would you like to chant again? Or is it too late, Swamiji? Prabhupada smiled. No, it is not too late. He would chant the prayers to his spiritual master. While his disciples lounged around the studio watching the spiritual master and the technical activity of the engineers behind the glass, Prabhupada began singing. Again, the harmonium's drone began, then the tambura and drum, but with a much smaller rhythm group than before. He sang through without any retakes and then ended the song and the evening with a fortissimo drumming as the hand-pumped organ notes faded. Again, Alan came out and thanked the Swami for being so patient and such a good studio musician. Prabhupada was still sitting. Now we are tired, he admitted. Suddenly, over the studio sound system came a playback of the Hare Krishna chanting, completed with echo. When Prabhupada heard the successful recording of his chanting, he became happy and stood and began dancing, swaying back and forth, dipping slightly from his waist, his arms upraised in the style of Lord Chaitanya, dancing in ecstasy. The scheduled performance was over, but now Swamiji was making the best performance of the evening from his spontaneous feelings. As he danced, his half asleep disciples became startled and also rose to their feet and joined him, dancing in the same style. And in the recording booth behind the glass, the engineers also raised their hands and began dancing and chanting. Now you have made your best record, Swamiji told Mr. Cowman as he left the studio for the freezing Manhattan evening. Swamiji got into the front seat of the Volkswagen bus while the Hare Krishna chanters climbed into the back with their instruments and Rupanaga drove them back home, back to the Lower East Side. The next morning, Prabhupada didn't get up. He was exhausted. Kirtanananda, who was personally serving him, became alarmed when Swami said something about his heart skipping and not being able to move. For the first time, it became apparent that he was overexerting himself. Kirtanananda thought back through the fall and summer when the Swami had led them all on hours long kirtans in the park or in late evening ventures when they had come to take it for granted. But now Kirtanananda saw that there was cause to be worried for Swamiji's health. Swamiji had no appetite for lunch, although by afternoon he regained his appetite and usual activity. That same day, a letter arrived from Mukunda in San Francisco. Not long after their wedding, Mukunda and Janaki had left for the West Coast. Mukunda had told Swamiji that he wanted to go to India to study in music, but after a few weeks in Southern Oregon, he had ended up in San Francisco. Now he had a better idea. He wanted to rent a place and invite Swamiji to come and start his Hare Krishna movement in the Haight Ashbury district, just as he was doing on the Lower East Side. He said that the prospects there for Krishna consciousness were very good. On hearing this, Prabhupada began unfolding his expansive plans. They should open temples not only in San Francisco, but one by one over the world, all over the world, even in Russia and China, and print the Bhagavad Gita in different languages. And he would translate all the volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam into English and take a party of devotees back to India. The devotees who heard him were amazed. Kirtanananda, who had just seen the alarming symptoms of Prabhupada's ill health, began to forget what he had thought earlier that morning. If Krishna desired, Kirtanananda thought Swamiji could do anything. When Prabhupada came down to hold his morning class on November 19th, he carried a large red book instead of the usual brown one. But no one noticed the difference. He began as usual, softly singing prayers to his spiritual master and accompanying himself with a fair rhythm on his bongo. The neighbors were still asleep. The weather was cold, but the steam radiators kept the storefront warm. There would be no more outdoor chanting now. In Manhattan, the city opens wide in the summer and shuts tight in the winter, which for the evening classes meant no more noisy children outside the door. And all the morning classes had been quiet in the summer. Now, with winter approaching, the group became a tighter, more committed core of sincere students coming together to hear Swamiji speak. It was now 4 months since he had begun ISKCON at 26 Second Avenue. He had held 3 separate initiations and initiated 19 devotees. Most of them had become serious. Although a few remained casual visitors now in the morning classes, Swamiji wanted to instruct them more about how to become devotees. He led the chanting of the Hare Krishna for 20 minutes, cautioning them to respond softly so that the neighbors would not pour water through the ceiling again, although they hadn't done it lately. Prabhupada always tried to cooperate with the tenants, but occasionally someone would start a petition which never amounted to much against the devotees. Sometimes Prabhupada would help the landlord, Mr. Chute, by taking out other tenants' garbage or giving him a hand. Mr. Chute was a husky, beer-bellied Polish refugee who lived alone in an apartment on the first floor. Mr. Chute respected the Swami for his age and scholarship, and Swamiji was always amiable with him. Whenever Mr. Chute came to the apartment, he would never take his shoes off, and Prabhupada would always say, "That's all right, that's all right." And one time when the plumbing didn't work in Prabhupada's apartment, Prabhupada went downstairs and took his shower in Chute's apartment. But Swamiji also considered Mr. Chute a classic example of a foolish materialist because although he had spent his life savings to buy this building, he still had to work so hard. Swamiji said he was a fool for having spent his savings to buy such a rundown building. Because the building was in such poor condition, he had to work like an ass to keep it up. This is how the materialists work, Swamiji would say. Mr. Chute, although respectful to the Swami, didn't like the devotees. Prabhupada told his disciples, treat him as if he were your father. So that's what they did. Anytime they would have to deal with Mr. Chute, they would approach him saying, we are your sons. Those disciples who lived at the storefront had risen by 6:30, bathed and assembled downstairs by 7. While those who lived outside were arriving separately, taking off their coats and piling them on the shelf of the display window. Although women always attended the evening meetings, Jadurani was usually the only girl who came in the morning. After breakfast, she would begin painting down upstairs in the Swami's front room. She used a beginner's technique of dividing the canvas into vertical and horizontal grid lines and transposing bit by bit the corresponding sections of the photograph onto the canvas. The process was painstaking, and sometimes her paintings was out of proportion. But Jadurani was sincere, and that pleased Prabhupada. She had completed several paintings of Oram Vishnu, a new painting of Radha Krishna, and a painting of Lord Chaitanya and his associates. When the painting of Lord Chaitanya was finished, Swamiji had it hung in the temple. Now he announced there should be no more nonsense here. Lord Chaitanya is present. After the morning Kirtan, Swami said, as usual, now chant one round. They chanted together following him. They all had a vow to chant 16 rounds daily, but they chanted their first round in the morning in the Swami's presence so he could see each of them. As Swamiji chanted, they looked out at Second Avenue, which was mostly deserted, or at the pictures on the wall, or with concerned glances at the individual devotees. Sometimes he seemed surprised when he saw them chanting so earnestly, giving evidence of the power of the holy name to deliver even the most fallen. Some of the devotees kept their beads in a bead bag like his, but when they chanted the first round together in the morning, they imitated him by holding their beads out in both hands and chanting along with him. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, until they finished one round. Then he held up the unfamiliar red book. Because you are a little advanced, he said, I am going to read today from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Chaitanya, what? No one was able to pick up the pronunciation. They had heard of Chaitanya, certainly, but not of this new book. But in his room the night before, Prabhupada had informed some of the devotees that he would start reading from a new book, Chaitanya Charitamrita. He said that Lord Chaitanya had told one of his disciples that understanding Krishna wasn't really possible, but that he would give the disciples just a drop of the ocean of Krishna consciousness. So that the disciple could then appreciate what the whole ocean must be like. Be patient as I present this. He had told them, it is revolutionary, but you should just be patient. In the storefront, Brahmananda turned on the reel-to-reel tape recorder as Swamiji began reading the Bengali verses. And both Satswarup and Umapati opened their notebook and waited poised for rapid note-taking. It was almost a college classroom atmosphere as Prabhupada cleared his throat, put on his glasses, and peered over the large open volume, turning to the correct page. Whenever he wore the glasses, he seemed to reveal a new personality of deep Vaishnava scholarship. This feature of Swamiji emphasized his old age. Not that it showed him feeble or invalid, but it emphasized his scholarship and wisdom and his contemplation of the scriptures. In contrast to his vigorous drum playing in Tompkins Square Park or his alert business dealings while looking for a new building, Swamiji began reading and translating the story of Sanatan, Satswarup wrote Sutta, and Umapati wrote Sonathon, and his brother Rupa, and how they became intimate associates of Lord Chaitanya. It was a historical account. Rupa and Sanatan had been born as Brahmanas in India, but they had served in the government under the Muslims, who were in power at that time. The true brothers had even adapted Muslim names. But when Lord Chaitanya was touring in their part of the country, they had met him and had become determined to give up their materialistic ways and follow his path of pure love of God. Rupa, who was so rich that he had enough gold to fill two boats, left his high government post, divided his wealth, became a mendicant, and joined Lord Chaitanya. For Sanatan, however, there were more obstacles. The Nawab Shah, the chief Muslim ruler of the province of Bengal, was dependent on Sanatan's managerial expertise. But Sanatan began staying home and submitting sick reports, while actually he had employed a dozen Brahmanas who were teaching him the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Nawab sent his physician to find out the actual state of Sanatan's health. And when the Nawab heard that Sanatan was not actually ill, he himself arrived one day, surprising Sanatan and the Brahmanas. The Nawab demanded that Sanatan return to his government work and leave him free to do some hunting and to leave Bengal on a military campaign. But Sanatan said that he could not that he was now determined to study the scriptures. And the Nawab could do with him whatever he liked. At this challenge, the Nawab imprisoned Sanatan. Swamiji looked at his watch. Morning classes were shorter than those in the evening, only half an hour, and Rupanuga, Satswarup, and Brahmananda had to go to work. He paused in his narration. Now, we will discuss tomorrow. Prabhupada closed the book, and after a few informal words, he got up and left the storefront, followed by Kirtanananda, who carried his book in glasses. Breakfast was served every morning in the storefront. Either Achutananda or Kirtanananda would cook an oatmeal cereal for the devotees. Satswarup had read in an English edition of the Ramayana about some sages preparing a mystical cereal called the heavenly porridge. The name had caught on, and the devotees began calling their own cereal heavenly porridge. The popular fare would consist of steaming hot heavenly porridge, sweetened to taste with sugar syrup from the gulab jamun pot, hot milk and fruit, and every devotee would get an ISKCON bullet. At breakfast this morning, the talk was of Rupa and Sanatan. Umapati said, the Chaitanya Charitamrita was available in an English translation, but maybe the Swami wouldn't want them to read it. We'll hear it from Swamiji, Kirtanananda said. Hagriva was amused at the cliffhanger ending of the class. Tune in tomorrow. He laughed loosely and whispered what happened. What's his name? The devotees responded differently. Sanatan, Sonaton, Sanatan, Hagriva. Yeah, tune in tomorrow and hear. Will Sanatan get out of jail? They were not the most sober group when together, especially after taking the thick, sweet syrup. Achutananda spilled some of the syrup on the rug, and Kirtanananda admonished him. Jadurani ate silently and hurried to begin the day's painting in Prabhupada's room. Satswarup adjusted his tie, and he and Rupanuga and Brahmananda went to their jobs. The next morning, the Chaitanya Charitamrita seminar began with Sanatan in jail, planning how to get free to join Lord Chaitanya. His brother Rupa sent him a note saying he had left a large sum of gold for Sanatan in the care of the grocer, and Sanatan offered the gold to the jailer as a bribe. He told him, Sir, I know you are a very learned man, and in your Quran it says that if you aid someone in going to spiritual life, then you will be elevated to the highest post. I'm going to Lord Chaitanya, and if you will assist me in escaping, it will be spiritual gain for you. Also, I'll give you 500 gold coins, so it will be a material gain as well. The jailkeeper said, All right. But I'm afraid of the king. So Sanatan advised him, just say that when I was passing stool by the river, I fell in with my chains and was washed away. For 700 gold coins, the jailer agreed to help Sanatan and sawed off the shackles. Sanatan, accompanied by his servant, then fled from the back roads until his night time. Now the hotel was kept by thieves, and an astrologer at the hotel read Sanatan's palm and judged by the stars that he had money. When Sanatan asked for assistance in passing over the jungle mountains, the hotel keeper said that he would help Sanatan leave in the dead of the night. They treated Sanatan with great respect, which made him suspicious, since he hadn't eaten in 3 days and his clothes were unclean. So he asked his servant if he had any money. The servant said yes, he had 7 gold coins, and Sanatan immediately took the money to the hotel keeper, who was already planning to kill him during the night and take his money. Swamiji looked at his watch. Again, they had gone overtime. So he would continue tomorrow, he said, closing the book. However, Sanatan's mangoes, how Sanatan manages to escape the dacoits. Kirtanananda, Brahmananda, Achutananda, Gargamuni, Satswarup, Hygriva, Umapati, Jadurani, Rupanuga, and Damodar, Dan Clark. Their lives had all been transformed. Over the months, they had transferred the center of their lives to Swamiji, and everything revolved around the routine of classes and kirtan and prasadam, and coming in and going to from the storefront. Brahmananda and Gargamuni had given up their apartment several months ago and moved into the storefront. The ceiling of Achyutananda's apartment had caved in one day, just minutes after he had left the room, and he decided to move to the storefront also. Haigriva and Umapati had cleaned up their Mott Street place and were using it only for chanting, sleeping, or reading Swamiji's Bhagavatam. Satswarup had announced one day that the devotees could use his apartment just around the corner from the temple for taking showers. And the next day, Raya Rama had moved in, and the others began using the apartment as a temple annex. Jadurani kept making her early morning treks from the Bronx. Swamiji had said that he had no objection to her living in the second room of his apartment, but that people would talk. Even Rupanuga and Damodar, whose backgrounds and tastes were different, were also positively dependent on the daily morning class and the evening class 3 nights a week. And knowing that Swamiji was always there in his apartment whenever they needed him. There were, however, some threats to their security. Prabhupada would sometimes say that unless he got permanent residency from the government, he would have to leave the country. But he had gone to a lawyer, and after the initial alarm, it seemed that Swamiji would stay indefinitely. There was also the treat that he had made he might go to San Francisco. He said he was going, but then sometimes he said he wasn't. If the negotiations through Mr. Price for the building on the 10th Street came through, then Swamiji said he would make his headquarters in New York City and not go to San Francisco. But at least in the morning sessions, as his disciples listened to him speaking on Chaitanya Charitamrita, those devotees were all put out of their mind. At the limitless intimate feeling, it took up their full attention. Krishna consciousness was a struggle, keeping yourself strictly following Swamiji's codes against Maya. No illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling, no meat eating. But it was possible as long as they could hear him singing and reading and speaking from Chaitanya Charitamrita. They counted on his presence for their Krishna consciousness. He was the center of their newly spiritualized lives. He was all they knew of Krishna. They could count on his presence for their Krishna consciousness. He was the center of their newly spiritualized lives, and he was all they knew of Krishna consciousness. As long as they could keep coming and seeing him, Krishna consciousness was a sure thing, as long as he was there. Seated on the woolen rug, they looked up at him, waiting for him to begin the next installment. Prabhupada cleared his throat and glanced over at Brahmananda, who sat beside silently running tape recorder. Satswarup entered the date in his notebook. Prabhupada began reading the Bengali verse and paraphrasing. Sanatan took the 7 gold coins from his servant and gave them to the hotel keeper. You have 8 coins, the astrologer said. Sanatan went back and found that his servant had retained another gold coin. Why do you carry this dead kennel on the road? Sanatan asked. You are too attached to money. And he took the gold piece from his servant and told him to return home. Sanatan then brought the gold coin to the hotel keeper. But the hotel keeper, who admitted that he had intended to kill Sanatan for his money, now said, You are a good man and you may keep your money. But Sanatan refused, and then the housekeeper provided Sanatan with 4 assistants. They held Sanatan through the jungle, then left him alone. Free from the nuisance servant and from the dacoit, Sanatan felt liberated as he passed along the road alone. Soon he came upon his brother-in-law who was traveling along the same road. His brother-in-law was a wealthy man carrying a great deal of money to buy horses. Please stay with me at least a few days. Sanatan's brother-in-law said, it was really bad how you look. The brother-in-law knew that Sanatan was going to spiritual life, but he requested that he improve his dress by accepting a valuable blanket from him. Sanatan took the blanket and continued on his way. At last, Sanatan reached Banaras and he went straight to the home of Chandrasekhar, where Lord Chaitanya was staying, waited outside the door. Lord Chaitanya knew Sanatan had arrived and he requested Chandrasekhar to go to the door and ask the devotee who was waiting there to come in. Chandrasekhar went out, but only saw the wretched looking Sanatan, whom he took to be a half-mad Mohammedan fakir. Chandrasekhar returned to Lord Chaitanya and explained that there was no devotee outside. Was there anyone at all? The Lord asked. Yes, said Chandrasekhar, some wretched fakir. Then Lord Chaitanya went to the door and embraced Sanatan. The Lord cried tears of ecstasy. He had at last found a devotee whom he knew was worthy to receive his entire teachings. And Sanatan cried tears of joy that his life's ambition was being fulfilled. But because he was dirty from his traveling and not worthy, he asked the Lord not to touch him. The Lord replied, it is I who benefit from touching you. Whoever touches a pure devotee, a true devotee is blessed. Prabhupada closed the book, ending another morning session. One of Prabhupada's main concern was to finish and publish as soon as possible his translation and commentary of Bhagavad Gita. And one day something happened that enabled him to increase his work on the manuscript. Unexpectedly, a boy named Neil arrived. He was a student from Antioch College on a special work study program, and he had the school's approval to work 1 term within the ashrams of Swami Bhaktivedanta, which he had heard about through the newspaper. Neil mentioned that he was a good typist, if that could be of any help to the Swami. Prabhupada considered this to be Krishna's blessing. Immediately, he rented a dictaphone and began dictating tapes. Hagriva donated his electric typewriter, and Neil set up his work area in Swamiji's front room and began typing 8 hours a day. This inspired Prabhupada and obligated him to produce more. He worked quickly, sometimes day and night, on his Bhagavad Gita as it is. He had founded ISKCON 5 months ago, yet in his classes, he was still reading the Bhagavad Gita translation of Dr. Radhakrishnan. But when Bhagavad Gita as it is would at last be published, he told his disciples it would be a it will be of major importance for the Krishna consciousness movement. At last, there would be bona fide edition of the Gita. Whatever Swamiji said or did, his disciples wanted to hear about it. Gradually, they increased their faith and devotion to Swamiji, whom they accepted as God's representative. And they took his actions and words to be absolute. After one of the disciples had been alone with him, the others would gather around to find out every detail of what had happened. It was Krishna consciousness. Jadurani was especially gullyless in relating what Swamiji had said or done. One day Prabhupada had stepped on a tack that Jadurani had dropped on the floor, and although she knew it was a serious offense to her spiritual master, the major importance of the event seemed to be how Prabhupada had displayed his transcendental consciousness. He silently and emotionally reached down and pulled the tag from his foot without so much as a cry. And once, when she was fixing a painting over his head behind the desk, she had accidentally stepped on his sitting mat. Is that an offense? She had asked. And Swamiji had replied, no. For service, you could even stand on my head. Sometimes Brahmananda would say that Swamiji had told him something very intimate about Krishna consciousness in private. But when he would tell what Swamiji had said, someone else would recall the same thing was in Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhupada had said that the spiritual master is present in his instructions, and he had tried to put everything into those 3 volumes of the Srimad of the Bhagavatam, and the devotees were finding this to be true. There was no secrets in Swamiji's family of devotees. Everyone knew that Umapati had left for a few days disappointed with Swami's severe criticism of the Buddhists, but he had come back, and in a heavy, sincere exchange with Prabhupada, he had decided to take to Krishna consciousness again. And everyone knew that Satsvarup had resigned from his job, and that whatever he wanted to tell Swamiji about it, Swamiji had told him that he could not quit because he should go on earning money for Krishna and donating it to the society, and that he would be his best service. And everyone knew that Swamiji wanted Gargamuni to cut his hair. Swamiji called it Gargamuni's Shakespearean locks, but that he would not do so. The year ended, and Prabhupada was still working on his manuscript of Bhagavad Gita, still lecturing in the morning from Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings from Bhagavad Gita, and still talking to going to San Francisco. Then New Year's Eve came, and the devotees suggested that since this was a holiday when people go out to celebrate, maybe they should hold a Krishna conscious festival. Rupanuga. So we had a big feast and a lot of people came, although it wasn't as crowded as a Sunday feast. We were all talking people, and Swamiji was sitting up on his desk, and he was also taking the prasadam. He had demanded that we eat lots of prasadam, and then he was saying, chant, chant. So we were eating and chanting Hare Krishna. Between bites, and he was insisting on more and more prasadam. I was amazed. He stayed with us and kept insisting that we eat so much. He stayed until 11 o'clock, and then he became drowsy and the party was over. Morning after morning, the story of Sanatan Goswami unfolded from the pages of Swamiji's big book, which only he could read and explain. But Chaitanya told Sanatan that he should be very grateful that Krishna had been merciful to him, to which Sanatan responded, Lord Chaitanya told Sanatan that he should be very grateful that Krishna had been merciful to him, to which Sanatan replied, you should say that Krishna is very merciful, but I do not know who Krishna is. You have saved me. Lord Chaitanya had many devotees in Banaras, and he sent Sanatan to the home of one of his friends where he could stay, and he would get something to eat, take a bath, shave, and dress in new clothing. Lord Chaitanya had many devotees in Banaras, and he sent Sanatan to the home of one of his friends, where he could get something to eat, take a bath, shave, and dress in new clothing. Sanatan, however, refused the new clothing, and he also refused to become dependent on one place for his meals. Now that he had entered the renounced order, he preferred to go begging his meals from a different place every day. When Lord Chaitanya saw this, he was pleased. But Sanatan sensed that his valuable blanket did not please the Lord. So he traded the new blanket for an old one. This pleased Lord Chaitanya, and he said, "Now you are completely renounced. Your last attachment is gone by the mercy of Krishna." Sanatan submitted himself at the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya and said, "I have wasted my time in sense gratification. I'm low born and I have low association. I have no qualification for spiritual life. I do not even know what is actually beneficial for me. People say that I'm learned, but I'm fool number one, because although people say I'm learned and although I accept it, still I do not know who I am." Sanatan presented himself as a blank slate, and he inquired from the Lord, "Who am I? Why am I in this material world? Why am I suffering?" Prabhupada emphasized that this was the perfect way for a disciple to accept a spiritual master. After narrating the story of Sanatan joining Lord Chaitanya, Prabhupada began lecturing on the Lord's teachings to Sanatan. Lord Chaitanya first explained that the living being is not the material body, but an eternal living soul within the body. Then, for 2 months, Lord Chaitanya instructed Sanatan, revealing to him the deepest and most sublime philosophical truths of Vedic wisdom. He enlightened Sanatan regarding the soul and its relationship with Krishna, the nature of the material and spiritual worlds, the characteristic of a fully realized soul, and the transcendental nature of Lord Krishna and his unlimited forms, expansions, incarnations, and divine pastimes. He explained the superiority of the path of Bhakti Yoga over the paths of philosophical speculation and mystic and yogic mysticism. And he revealed to Sanatan the esoteric knowledge of spiritual ecstasy experienced by those souls who have achieved pure love for Krishna. These teachings of the Lord were like an ocean that overflooded the mind of Sanatan Goswami with its sweetness and grandeur. When Lord Chaitanya had finished instructing Sanatan, he gave Sanatan the benediction that all those sublime teachings would be fully manifest within his heart, thus enabling him to compose transcendental literature. For 2 months, Lord Chaitanya had instructed Sanatan Goswami, and for 2 months, starting in mid-November of 1966, Srila Prabhupada narrated in over 50 lectures the Chaitanya Charitamrita's account of those teachings. Although each of his talks covered the subject matter of the verses, his lectures were never limited to his subject, nor were they prepared talks. Sometimes during the evening gathering in his room, Swamiji would ask whether Mukunda was ready on the West Coast. For months, Prabhupada's going to the West Coast had been one of a number of alternatives. But then, during the first week of New Year, a letter arrived from Mukunda. He had rented a storefront in the heart of the Haight Ashbury district on Frederick Street. "We are busy converting it into a temple now," he wrote, and Prabhupada announced, "I shall go immediately." Mukunda had told a gathering of the tribes in San Francisco's Haight Ashbury. Thousands of hippies were migrating from all over the country to the very neighborhood where Mukunda had rented the storefront. It was a youth renaissance neighborhood where Mukunda had rented the store. It was a youth renaissance much bigger than what was going on in New York City. In his scheme to raise funds for the new temple, Mukunda was planning a mantra rock dance, and famous rock bands were going to appear. And Swami Bhaktivedanta and the chanting of Hare Krishna were to be the center of attraction. Although in his letter Mukunda had enclosed a plain ticket, some of Swamiji's followers refused to accept that Swamiji would use it. Those uh, who, who knew they could never leave New York began to criticize the idea of Swamiji's going to San Francisco. They didn't think that people out on the West Coast could take care of Swamiji properly. Swamiji appearing with rock musicians. Those people out there didn't seem to have the proper respect. Anyway, there was no suitable temple there. There was no printing press, no Back to Godhead magazine. Why should Swamiji leave New York to attend a function like that with strangers in California? How could he leave them behind in New York? How could their spiritual life continue without him? Timidly, one of the two dissenters indirectly expressed some of the feelings to Prabhupada as if almost wishing to admonish him for thinking of leaving them and even hinting that things would not go well, either in San Francisco or New York if he departed. But they found Prabhupada quite confident and determined. He did not belong to New York, he belonged to Krishna, and he had to go wherever Krishna desired him to preach. Prabhupada showing a spirit of complete detachment, eager to try to leave. I never thought that Krishna consciousness would go beyond the Lower East Side, what to speak of New York City. I thought that this was it, and it would stay here eternally. In the last days of the second week of January, final plane reservations were made, and devotees began packing. Swamiji's from Thompson Square Park had collected enough money for a plane ticket. The devotees decided that he should accompany Prabhupada as his personal assistant. Prabhupada explained programs to go on in his absence. He waited in his room while the boys arranged for a car to take him to the airport. The day was gray and cold, and steam hissed in the radiators. He would take only a suitcase, mostly clothes and some books. He checked the closet to see that his manuscripts were in order. He sat down at his desk where for more than 6 months he had sat so many times, working for hours at the typewriter, preparing his Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and where he had started talking to so many guests and to his followers. But today he would not be talking with friends or typing manuscript, but waiting a last few minutes alone before his departure. This was his second winter in New York. He had launched a movement of Krishna consciousness. A few sincere boys and girls had joined, and they were already well known on the Lower East Side. Many noticed in many notices in the newspapers, and it was only the beginning. He had left Vrindavan for this. At first, he had not been certain whether he would stay in America more than 2 months. In Butler, he had presented his books. But then in New York, he had seen how Dr. Mishra had developed things, and the Mayavadis had a big building. They were taking money, not even delivering the real message of the Gita. But the American people were looking. It had been a difficult year. His god brothers had not been interested in helping, although this was what the Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wanted, and what Lord Chaitanya wanted. Because Lord Chaitanya wanted it, his blessings would come and it would happen. This was a nice place, 26 Second Avenue. He had started here. The boys would keep it up. Some of them were donating their salaries. It was a start. Prabhupada looked at his watch. He put on his tweed winter coat and his hat and shoes, put his right hand in his bead bag, and continued chanting. He walked out of the apartment, down the stairs, and through the courtyard, which was now frozen and still, its trees stark bare without a single leaf remaining, and he left the storefront behind. He left even while Brahmananda, Rupanuga, and Satswarup were at their office jobs. There were not even a farewell scene or a farewell address. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.